The first insult came before the curtain had risen. It arrived softly, almost sweetly, carried on the scent of wax, violets, and warmed silk through the crowded hush of Her Majesty's theatre, where all London had gathered to pretend that music mattered more than rank. Miss Sophronia Lyle heard it from the back of Mrs. Marcella Vane's private box, where she had been placed behind a fan of ostrich feathers, 2 satin shoulders, and a brass opera glass that was not hers to touch. "You will sit there, my dear," Mrs. Vane had murmured, with the tender cruelty of a woman who never raised her voice. When a lower one would wound, no one minds a useful companion near the curtain. Sophronia had smiled, because smiling was cheaper than protest. She had folded her hands over the cracked tortoise-shell program case in her lap, and reminded herself that a woman without fortune must spend dignity carefully, never all at once. London, May 1847, glittered below her like a jewel box opened for judgment. The tiers of boxes shone with candlelight. White gloves moved like pale birds. Jewels flashed against throats that had never known hunger, and gentlemen leaned with the lazy confidence of men whose names had been printed on doors, ledgers, marriage settlements, and invitations since before they were born. Sophronia's name had not been printed anywhere important in years. It had been written in careful ink on old letters, on unpaid bills, on the inside of a small trunk, and once, long ago, on the lid of a music box her mother had sold during the winter after her father died. Tonight, it was not written on the box list. She was present only because Mrs. Vane found her useful. She carried shawls. She remembered who disliked whom. She could lower her eyes at the precise angle that made richer women feel generous. She was 27, gently born, poorly kept, and socially invisible in the practiced way that required more discipline than beauty ever had. In her lap lay the only object she had refused to sell. The program case had belonged to her mother, Clara Lyle. Its tortoise-shell surface had dulled with age, and the silver swan clasp had cracked at one wing. But Sophronia polished it every Saturday with a soft cloth. Inside were folded programs from evenings her mother had once attended before widowhood, debt, and whispered disgrace had closed every door. There was also a small old counterfoil tucked behind the lining, stiff with age, its meaning lost to her. Sophronia had never removed it. Some things survived only because no one rich had thought them worth stealing. "Do not clutch that shabby thing," Mrs. Vane said without turning her head. "It draws the eye." "Then I shall keep it still," Sophronia answered quietly. "Stillness doesn't make old things new," said Lady Eulalie Fane from the front of the box. She did not look back at once. She allowed the words to float over her shoulder, like a ribbon dropped for someone else to pick up. Lady Eulalie had the kind of beauty that made women forgive her malice for the privilege of describing it. Pale gold hair, a throat like carved cream, a mouth trained to curve before it cut. She was the only daughter of Lord Tarquin Fane, Earl of Petherton, and society had already decided she would look well beneath a ducal coronet. Perhaps not any coronet, the right one, the Keldrake one. Sophronia lowered her gaze to the program case, not from shame, but to ensure her fingers had not tightened. They had. She eased them one by one. From the stage came the last small movements before performance, the scrape of a chair, the tremor of tuning strings, the breath before art. Around her, society arranged itself to be seen listening. Marcella Vane leaned forward to speak with Lady Eulalie's mother. Two matrons in the next box examined every gown below. A young viscount laughed too loudly at nothing. Then a shift passed through the theatre. It was not sound exactly. It was a tension changing direction. Sophronia felt it before she followed it. Across the glowing horseshoe of boxes, a tall gentleman had entered a crimson-draped private box with no haste and no visible need to be admired. That was why everyone admired him. Gareth St, Ormond, Duke of Keldrake, stood for a moment behind the rail, gloved hand resting lightly on the carved edge, his dark evening coat severe among the silks and diamonds surrounding him. He was not the handsomest man in the theatre, though many would have sworn he was after one glance, and revised their standards afterward. His power did not announce itself. It settled. His face was composed, his mouth unsmiling, his eyes so steady that even those too far away to meet them seemed to straighten. "There he is," breathed Mrs. Vane. "Do not stare, Sophronia." Sophronia had not been staring. She had been observing, which was different, though society rarely forgave women for knowing the distinction. Lady Eulalie turned then, the white feathers in her hair trembling faintly. Her smile sharpened when she noticed the program case properly for the first time. Not the worn tortoise shell, not the crack, the clasp. Her gaze fixed on the silver swan as if it had spoken. "Where did you get that?" Sophronia looked up. "It was my mother's." "Your mother's?" Eulalie's voice remained light, but something beneath it had lost color. "How curious." "Not very," Sophronia said. "Daughters often keep their mother's things." Mrs. Vane's shoulders stiffened. A companion was allowed gratitude, softness, and silence. Wit was a luxury. Eulalie extended her hand. "May I see it?" The request was perfectly shaped. Refusing it would look rude. Granting it felt dangerous. Sophronia had lived long enough in borrowed rooms to know that some people did not ask to see a thing unless they had already imagined possessing it. She rested both hands over the case. "I would rather not pass it about in a crowded box." "Pass it about?" Eulalie repeated, as if Sophronia had placed something vulgar on the carpet. "My dear Miss Lyle, I only wondered at the clasp. It resembles an old committee mark." Lord Tarquin Fane, seated beside Mrs. Vane, turned his head with sudden attention. He was a broad, silver-haired man with a face built for public trust. Nothing about him seemed hurried until one watched his hands. One thumb pressed against the edge of his program, hard enough to bend it. "What committee mark?" he asked. Eulalie's smile returned too quickly. "I may be mistaken, father." Tarquin's eyes moved to Sophronia. He did not ask as his daughter had asked. He inspected. "Miss Lyle, is it?" "Yes, my lord." "And your mother was?" "Mrs. Clara Lyle." A silence, brief but unnatural, passed between father and daughter. Sophronia noticed it because she had made a life out of noticing what people hoped servants, dependents, and poor relations would miss. Mrs. Vane gave a brittle little laugh. Sophronia's mother had a sentimental fondness for music. Nothing more grand than that, I am sure. Music often invites grand claims from those who mistake sentiment for entitlement, Eulalie said. She looked down into the stalls, then back at the case. "One must be careful. A box at the opera is not a church pew. One cannot simply sit wherever memory places one." Heat rose along Sophronia's throat. Around them, no one appeared to listen, which meant everyone near enough was listening very well. She could feel the structure of the insult forming. Not direct enough to answer without seeming defensive. Not vague enough to ignore without swallowing it whole. "Mrs." Vane murmured. "Lady Eulalie means only that these old tokens can be misunderstood. Then, perhaps old tokens should not be judged by those who do not understand them," Sophronia said. The words were quiet. They were not meek. Lady Eulalie's eyes widened with pleasure, not shock. She had wanted resistance. It gave shape to the punishment she was preparing. Across the theatre, the Duke of Keldrake had taken his seat. Sophronia did not know why she sensed his attention at that instant. Perhaps because Lady Eulalie's posture changed by a fraction. Perhaps because Mrs. Vane drew herself higher, as though observed by rank. Or perhaps because, for one suspended second, the warm noise of the opera house thinned, and Sophronia looked across the distance to find the Duke's gaze resting not on Eulalie, not on Mrs. Vane, not on the diamonds arranged to catch him, but on the back of the box where she sat with an old cracked case in her lap. He did not smile, he did not soften, he simply looked, and the steadiness of it struck her more sharply than admiration would have done. Men had looked past Sophronia for years. Some had looked through her, a few had looked at her when they required a message carried, a shawl fetched, a silence maintained. The Duke looked as if he had seen the exact moment a knife entered a room, though no blade had been drawn. Sophronia should have lowered her eyes. That would have been safe, proper, forgettable. Instead, she held herself still, not challenging him, not inviting him, only refusing to appear ashamed of being seen. The orchestra began. The first notes rose like a curtain made of breath. Conversation folded away, but the tension in Mrs. Vane's box did not. Eulalie turned toward the stage, her profile lovely and cold. Lord Tarquin leaned back, but his gaze returned twice to the silver swan clasp. Mrs. Vane's fan moved faster than the music required. Sophronia opened her program case with care, the cracked clasp giving a faint, dry click beneath her thumb. The old counterfoil inside shifted slightly, showing the corner of faded ink. She pressed it back before anyone could see. Her heart had begun to beat too hard, which annoyed her. Fear was natural. Displaying it was wasteful. On the stage, a soprano lifted her voice toward grief, wrapped in Italian silk. Around Sophronia, society surrendered to the performance with exquisite hypocrisy. Yet Lady Eulalie's whisper returned between two phrases of music, soft enough to be deniable, clear enough to wound. A useful companion near the curtain is one thing. A poor woman pretending at old privileges is another. Sophronia did not answer. Not yet. Some battles demanded witnesses. Some demanded proof, and some began with the simple act of keeping one's seat, when every polished voice in the room suggested one had no right to it. Across the opera house, from the crimson shadow of his box, the Duke of Keldrake was still watching. Eulalie leaned toward her father, her lips barely moving. Sophronia caught only the end of it, but the words landed like a cold fingertip at the back of her neck. If she shows that clasp to the wrong person, father, the old list will speak. The first act ended with thunderous applause, though Sophronia heard it, as if from beneath water. The music had risen, broken, and settled into the golden uproar of London approval. But the words Lady Eulalie had whispered remained sharper than any aria. The old list will speak. Sophronia kept her gloved hands folded over the program case until the final note faded. Only then did she feel the small tremor in her fingers. Around her, the theatre woke into motion. Gentlemen stood. Ladies adjusted jewels. Fans opened with crisp little snaps like wings testing the air. The interval had begun, and with it came that other performance at which London excelled, the art of judging one another while pretending to discuss music. Mrs. Marcella Vane turned at once, her smile thin with panic. "You will say nothing more tonight, Sophronia. Not one word." "I had not planned a speech," Sophronia said. "No, you had planned something worse. You planned dignity." Marcella's fan fluttered violently. "Dignity is charming in women who possess settlements. In women who depend upon relatives, it is often mistaken for insolence. Lady Eulalie rose from her chair with graceful deliberation. She did not look frightened now. She looked resolved. Lord Tarquin stood beside her, broad and respectable, the candlelight silvering his hair until he resembled a magistrate in evening dress. Only his eyes remained restless. They went again to the cracked silver swan clasp. "Miss Lyle," Eulalie said, lightly enough for neighboring boxes to hear. "I fear there has been some misunderstanding about that old case of yours." The nearest conversation softened. A matron in violet silk paused with her opera glass halfway lifted. A young lady behind a pearl-edged fan angled her head. Sophronia saw the trap forming in the space between one breath and the next. "There is no misunderstanding," Sophronia replied. "It belonged to my mother, so you have said. But heirlooms sometimes travel through households in irregular ways, don't they? A lady's companion may be given a cast-off or may preserve some trifle beyond its proper meaning." Mrs. Vane made a small choking sound. "Lady Eulalie, I am certain Sophronia meant no claim." "No claim?" Eulalie's eyes brightened. "Then she will not mind saying so." Sophronia looked from Eulalie to Lord Tarquin. His expression had not altered, but his thumb pressed once against the bent program in his hand. He wanted her to deny the object before witnesses. Not sell it, not surrender it, deny it. That frightened her more than a direct accusation would have done. "I shall not declare my mother's possession meaningless merely because you dislike its clasp," Sophronia said. The words did not carry far, but they carried far enough. A hush opened inside the interval chatter. Eulalie's smile did not move. "How unfortunate. You see, Father, this is precisely what I feared. Miss Lyle appears to believe the mark gives her some privilege." "No privilege has been claimed," Sophronia said. "Not yet," Eulalie answered. "But perhaps that is why you chose to sit here tonight, where certain eyes might notice you. There it was. Not theft, not quite. Something uglier, because it could not be answered with an empty pocket or a searched reticule. Ambition, impropriety. A poor woman pretending herself into rank." Marcella leaned close enough that her whisper brushed Sophronia's cheek. "Apologize. Say you were mistaken. Say you know nothing of any old mark." "I do know nothing of it," Sophronia whispered back. "Then all the easier. No, ignorance is not guilt." Across the theatre, a liveried footman entered the Duke of Keldrake's box and bent to receive a folded note from a gentleman seated behind his grace. Sophronia saw it only because her senses had narrowed to danger. The Duke himself remained standing near the rail, looking not at Lady Eulalie, though half the theatre expected him to do so, but toward the disturbance in Marcella Vane's box. A minute later, the footman appeared at their door. Mrs. Vane paled. "From His Grace the Duke of Keldrake," the man said, bowing. Lord Tarquin's face changed by no more than a line, but Sophronia saw it. Satisfaction. Marcella snatched at the note, then remembered herself and passed it to Sophronia with fingers that trembled. "Read it," she breathed. Sophronia unfolded the paper. The handwriting was spare, black, and controlled. "Withdraw quietly and spare the house a scene." For one instant, the heat in her face vanished, leaving her cold all the way through. It should not have hurt. The Duke was no friend to her. He knew nothing of her mother, nothing of the counterfoil tucked in the lining, nothing of the years in which Sophronia had learned to occupy less space than grief required. He saw only a disturbance in a public theatre and wished it ended. That was what powerful men did. They did not need cruelty. Convenience served. Marcella seized hope like a rope. "There, you see? Even his grace advises discretion. Give Lady Eulalie the apology and leave before more people notice. Eulalie lowered her lashes. I would accept a private apology. I don't wish to ruin anyone. That lie steadied Sophronia. Pity, when performed by the person holding the knife, had always cleared her head. She looked at the note again. Withdraw quietly. Spare the house a scene. Below the Duke's words was empty space. Sophronia took the small pencil attached to Mrs. Vane's program. Marcella whispered, What are you doing? Answering his grace. Sophronia, don't be mad. I'm trying very hard not to be. She wrote beneath the Duke's command in a hand that remained steadier than her pulse. Tell his grace I will not vanish, merely because my presence inconveniences rank. Then she folded the note once and gave it back to the footman. For his grace. The man hesitated. No one had prepared him for a dependent woman answering a duke. That small pause did more damage than laughter. It told everyone who saw it that something improper had occurred. Lord Tarquin's eyes narrowed. Eulalie's lips parted in delight. Marcella closed her fan slowly, as if she had just heard the lid of a coffin settle. The footman crossed the curve of the theatre. Sophronia watched him go, because looking away would have been worse. Her mouth had gone dry. Her thumb pressed too hard against the cracked clasp of the program case, and the silver wing bit through her glove. She did not move. In the Keldrake box, the note reached the Duke. He opened it with no visible impatience. He read his own sentence first. Then hers. A gentleman beside him leaned closer, perhaps to ask what she had written. The Duke did not show him. He folded the paper and held it in his hand. Then he rose fully. A strange, quiet spread before anyone understood why. It began in the boxes nearest his, then moved outward as heads turned to follow the direction of his gaze. Sophronia felt that gaze arrive before she met it. It crossed the lit theatre, over diamonds and feathers, over titled mothers and ambitious daughters, over Eulalie's perfect profile and Tarquin's stiffened jaw, and came to rest on the woman at the back of Mrs. Vane's box who had just refused to disappear. He looked at her as if the command he had sent had returned to him carrying judgment, not anger, not amusement. Recognition. Sophronia's first instinct was to lower her eyes. Everything in her training urged it. A woman in her position should be grateful for any notice and terrified of too much. But she had not answered him to become invisible again, so she held his gaze. The theatre seemed to draw one breath. Then Gareth St. Ormond, Duke of Keldrake, bowed, not to Lady Eulalie, not to Mrs. Vane, to Sophronia. It was not deep enough to suggest intimacy. It was not slight enough to be dismissed as accident. It was the exact measure of public acknowledgement, performed by a man whose smallest gesture could change the temperature of a room. Behind her, someone whispered. In the next box, the matron in violet silk lowered her opera glass. Marcella's breath caught. Lord Tarquin's face lost its magistrate's calm. Eulalie went very still. Sophronia did not smile. She could not. Relief would have been premature, and triumph vulgar. She inclined her head in return, with every ounce of composure she possessed. The orchestra began summoning the audience back with the first restless notes before the second act, but nobody in their circle moved at once. The Duke sat only after Sophronia did. That, too, was noticed. Marcella leaned close, voice thin. You have made yourself impossible. Sophronia looked down at the program case in her lap. Her thumb ached sharply now. When she shifted her hand, the cracked silver swan clasp gave a brittle snap. The wing opened wider than it ever had before, and something folded, old, and cream-colored slipped up from beneath the lining. Sophronia caught it before it fell. Her mother's initials, CL, showed in faded brown ink. Lady Yulee saw them. So did Lord Tarquin. On stage, the curtain rose into painted moonlight. In the box, no one breathed. The carriage door shut on the roar of the opera house, and Mrs. Marcella Vane waited, only until the wheels began to turn, before she forgot every rule of gentility she had ever used as a weapon. "Have you taken leave of your senses?" she whispered, because anger in a carriage still had to travel under glass. Sophronia sat opposite her, with the program case pressed flat beneath both hands, the little folded counterfoil hidden again beneath the loosened silver swan clasp. The pain in her thumb had become a small, insistent pulse. She was grateful for it. Pain was simpler than fear. Outside, London blurred past in lamplight and wet stone. Behind them, Her Majesty's theatre still glowed with music, gossip, and the astonishment of a duke bowing to a woman no one had meant to see. "I answered a note," Sophronia said. "You answered a duke." Marcella's fan snapped open in the dimness, though no heat troubled the carriage. "There is a difference that even you, with your inconvenient education, ought to comprehend." Lady Eulalie Fane had not travelled back with them. Lord Tarquin had taken his daughter away in his own carriage, with an expression so composed that Sophronia trusted it less than open rage. But Eulalie's stillness remained in the air. So did the moment when the cream-coloured slip had shown her mother's initials. CL. Sophronia had folded the counterfoil into the lining again before anyone could touch it. But not before Lord Tarquin saw. His look had changed then. Not into surprise, into recognition. "You will give me that case," Marcella said. Sophronia's hands did not move. "No." The word fell between them very softly. Marcella stared at her as though furniture had spoken. "I beg your pardon." "No, Mrs. Vane. Do you understand your position in my house?" "I understand it better after tonight." Marcella leaned back, her mouth tight. "You are not a heroine in a novel. You are a dependent gentlewoman with no settlement, no brother, no husband, and no one of consequence obliged to defend you." His Grace's bow was not a proposal. It was not even approval. It was a moment, and moments do not pay for bread. Sophronia looked down at the case. The crack in the clasp had opened like a wound. "Then I shall have to survive on something other than moments." "Pride," Marcella said, "has a poor table. So does cowardice." Silence struck the carriage. Sophronia regretted the sharpness at once, not because it was untrue, but because truth had weight, and she was very tired. Marcella turned toward the window, her profile stiff with offended virtue. "When we reach home, you will go upstairs. Tomorrow, you will write to Lady Eulalie. You will say you were overwrought, that the old case has no meaning, and that you never intended to imply any claim to whatever foolish association she imagined. If she is generous, she may let the matter die." Sophronia closed her sore thumb inside her palm. She felt the edge of the hidden counterfoil beneath the lining. "And if she is not generous," Marcella's answer came after a pause, "then you had better pray." His Grace enjoyed his little performance enough to remember it. The next morning, Sophronia woke before the housemaids finished lighting fires. She had slept scarcely at all. The program case lay beneath her pillow, wrapped in a handkerchief, as if it were a living thing that might be stolen in the night. In the grey wash of dawn, she removed the counterfoil for the first time. The paper resisted, dry and fragile, but it did not tear. The initials on the fold were indeed her mother's. Clara Lyle. Inside, in faded brown ink, were words that made no sense and yet changed the shape of the room. Lyle, Swan Box, paid in perpetuity. Sophronia read them once, then again. Then she pressed the paper to the coverlet and sat very still. The Swan Box, paid in perpetuity. Her mother had once spoken of swans in a voice she used for memories she did not intend to explain. Sophronia had been a child then, more interested in the shine of the silver clasp than in any sadness that moved behind her mother's eyes. Now the sadness had acquired handwriting. A maid knocked before Sophronia could hide the paper properly. "Mrs. Vane wants you below after breakfast, miss." "There's been a card." Sophronia slipped the counterfoil back beneath the lining, shut the broken clasp as far as it would go, and went downstairs with the case in her hands because leaving it behind felt more dangerous than carrying it. Mrs. Vane's drawing room had been arranged for battle disguised as civility. The curtains were half drawn. The tea tray stood untouched. Marcella sat upright on the green sofa, wearing black silk and martyrdom. On the salver beside her lay a calling card. Gareth St. Ormond, Duke of Keldrake. Sophronia's breath caught, despite every lesson she had given herself about composure. "You will let me speak," Marcella said. "If His Grace asks a question, I shall answer. You will not volunteer opinions, family stories, or mysterious remarks about old paper." "The card was sent to you," Sophronia said. "The note was sent to me." Marcella looked as if she had swallowed lemon. "You are determined to be impossible." "No, only present." Before Marcella could answer, the butler opened the door. The Duke of Keldrake entered without haste, and the room seemed to become smaller around him. Morning suited him less softly than evening. In daylight, his restraint was clearer, so was the intelligence in his eyes. He bowed first to Mrs. Vane, then to Sophronia, not deeply, not theatrically enough. "Mrs. Vane, Miss Lyle." "Your Grace," Marcella said, sweetness rushing back over her like poured syrup. "We are honored beyond measure. I must apologize for last evening's unfortunate disturbance." Miss Lyle was overcome by the atmosphere. She has a sentimental nature and very little experience of such public attention. "Has she?" he asked. His voice was calm. Sophronia could not tell whether he believed a word. Marcella gestured toward the tea. "You will find, Your Grace, that the matter was no more than a misunderstanding over an old trinket." Gareth's gaze moved to the program case in Sophronia's lap. Old objects are often where misunderstandings choose to hide. Marcella laughed too brightly. How cleverly put. Sophronia did not laugh. The Duke saw that too. From inside his coat, he withdrew a folded paper. "I came to return this." He placed it on the small table, not in Marcella's reach, but nearer Sophronia. She recognized the note at once. His command, her answer. "I thought you might prefer it not circulate through hands less careful than mine." Marcella's eyes flicked toward the paper with naked alarm. Sophronia looked at him. That was considerate. "It was overdue," he said. The words were plain, almost severe, but something in them shifted the room. Marcella sat forward. "Your Grace is too gracious. Miss Lyle understands, of course, that your advice last evening was meant only to prevent embarrassment." "I meant to end a scene," he said. I had not yet asked who was being made to bear the cost of ending it. Sophronia felt the sentence move through her like warmth and warning together. A less careful man would have offered apology as performance. A more arrogant one would have offered none at all. Gareth St. Ormond did neither. He did not soften his face. He simply placed the truth where everyone could see it and left it there. Marcella's smile faltered. There was no cost. Miss Lyle may disagree. His attention returned to Sophronia. "Do you?" The question startled her more than any command could have done. Men of his rank did not usually ask women of her position to define injury. They named it for them or dismissed it entirely. Yes, she said. I do. Marcella inhaled sharply. The Duke gave one small nod, as if the answer deserved no punishment. Then I shall not ask you to pretend otherwise. Sophronia's fingers tightened around the case, and the cracked clasp shifted. A bright prick of pain crossed her thumb. She drew breath before she could stop herself. Gareth's gaze dropped at once. You are hurt. It is nothing. May I? He had not moved toward her. He had only extended his hand, palm slightly open, waiting. The restraint of it unsettled her. A man might command a carriage, silence a room, bend the attention of an opera house with a single bow. Yet he was asking permission to look at one small cut. Marcella began. There is no need for such fuss. Sophronia ignored her. Slowly she lifted her hand. She did not give it into his grasp. She turned it enough for him to see. The glove had split near the thumb, and a fine line of red marked the kid leather where the clasp had bitten. Gareth took out a clean white handkerchief and offered it to her without touching her skin. For the pressure, if you wish. Sophronia accepted it. Their fingers did not meet. Somehow, the absence of contact felt more intimate than carelessly taking her hand would have done. Thank you. The clasp did that? He asked. Yes. May I see the mechanism? Marcella rose halfway. Your Grace, surely an old case is hardly worth your attention. That depends upon why Lord Petherton was afraid of it. The room went still. Sophronia looked up. You noticed that? I noticed his hands, Gareth said. Men who are not afraid of objects do not watch them breathe. For the first time since the opera, Sophronia felt something stronger than alarm. Not safety, not yet, but possibility. She opened the program case carefully. The counterfoil remained tucked beneath the lining, visible only at the edge. Gareth saw it. He did not reach for it. Miss Lyle, he said, his voice lower, I will not ask you to surrender what belongs to your mother, but I will ask whether you know what it means. Sophronia looked at the faded corner beneath the broken silver swan. Lyle, Swan Box, paid in perpetuity. She had read the words at dawn. She still did not understand them. No, she said, but I believe Lady Eulalie does, and I believe Lord Tarquin wishes I never learn. A footstep sounded in the hall. The butler entered with a small silver tray and a folded message. His face was carefully blank, which meant the message had already alarmed the servants. For Miss Lyle. Marcella snatched it first, but Gareth's gaze stopped her hand in mid-air. After one brittle second, she passed it to Sophronia. The seal was plain, no crest. Sophronia opened it. The words inside were slanted, hurried, and cruel. Destroy the counterfoil, Miss Lyle, or your father's name will be ruined twice. The drawing room faded at the edges. Her father. Not her mother now, her father. Gareth did not ask to take the note. He waited until she looked up. May I read it? Sophronia held the paper for one heartbeat longer. Then she placed it on the table between them. Not into his hand, not into Marcella's. Between them. A choice. A beginning. The Duke read it once, and all the coldness in his face changed into something far more dangerous. Attention with purpose. Mrs. Vane, he said, without looking away from the paper. I believe your misunderstanding has acquired handwriting. By noon the next day, Mrs. Marcella Vane had transformed fear into stationery. Sophronia found the letter waiting on the small escritoire in the morning room, written in Marcella's own elegant hand and placed beside a fresh pen as if obedience were a matter of convenience. Outside, the house moved with its usual polished quiet. Coal settled in grates. A maid crossed the hall with folded linen. Somewhere below stairs, a door shut softly enough to prove that everyone had heard everything. Sophronia stood before the escritoire with the cracked tortoise-shell program case tucked beneath her arm and the anonymous threat folded inside her reticule. Her thumb still ached where the broken silver swan clasp had cut through the glove the night before. The pain had dulled, but it had not vanished. Neither had the look on the Duke of Keldrake's face when he read the warning about her father. Attention with purpose, that was what she had called it. In the secret part of her mind, the part no relative could command and no patroness could inventory. Marcella entered without greeting. She wore lavender silk, a color that made her seem gentle to those who did not know her. "You will sign it before luncheon." Sophronia looked down at the page. "To Lady Eulalie Fane, with my sincere regret. I acknowledge that my possession of an old program case led me to speak beyond my station. I make no claim to any privilege, subscription, box entitlement, charitable connection, or right associated with the mark upon the clasp. Any impression to the contrary was caused by confusion and sentiment." The words were so neatly cruel that Sophronia almost admired them. They did not call her a liar. They made her one. "No," she said. Marcella's face did not change at once. "You have not read the entire letter. I have read enough to know it asks me to bury my mother. It asks you to prevent ruin. Whose?" The question landed cleanly. Marcella closed the door behind her. That frightened Sophronia more than if she had raised her voice. "You are becoming theatrical." "I am becoming accurate. Accuracy is a poor shield when no one powerful wants to hear it." Marcella came to the escritoire and tapped the page with one pale finger. "This letter gives everyone a way out. Lady Eulalie may accept your apology. Lord Petherton may forget your impertinence. The Duke may remember you as a brief curiosity rather than a public nuisance. Most importantly, you may remain in a house that has fed you, dressed you, and presented you respectably." Sophronia felt each phrase as it was intended. Fed, dressed, presented, not loved, not protected, not believed. "I am grateful for shelter," she said. "But gratitude is not the same as surrender." Marcella's eyes sharpened. "Do not dress pride as principle. A dependent woman cannot afford memory, pride, or legal rights. Those belong to people with money enough to survive being disliked." Sophronia touched the edge of the program case. Beneath the damaged clasp lay the counterfoil with her mother's initials and those impossible words. Lyle, Swan Box, paid in perpetuity. The thing she did not yet understand had already demanded too high a price to be discarded cheaply. "Then I must learn to survive being disliked. You will be turned out of every decent drawing room. I have mostly been placed at the back of them." Marcella's mouth tightened. "Sign." Sophronia took up the pen. Marcella's shoulders eased. Then Sophronia drew a single line through the first sentence, careful and black. She set the pen down. "I will not." For one suspended moment, neither woman moved. Then Marcella laughed once, softly, with more anger in it than a shout. "Pack what belongs to you." The instruction should have felt like a blow. Instead, it felt like a door opening onto cold air. Sophronia's knees threatened to loosen. But she curtsied because habit was sometimes the last architecture of courage. "I shall be gone before tea." "Where will you go?" Marcella asked, and there was triumph hidden inside the question. Sophronia thought of Mrs. Anning, her mother's old music teacher in Bloomsbury, who had once written at Christmas in a hand made shaky by age but steady in kindness. "If ever Clara's child should need a door, mine will not be locked." Sophronia had kept the note folded in a prayer book. She had not thought she would use it. "Somewhere I am not required to sign away the dead." Marcella's composure cracked only slightly. You will regret this. Sophronia lifted the program case and held it close. Very likely. By late afternoon, she stood in a narrow Bloomsbury parlour that smelled of beeswax, old music paper, and strong tea. Mrs. Anning was smaller than Sophronia remembered, with silver hair pinned under a lace cap and spectacles that magnified eyes made kind by use rather than innocence. She had accepted Sophronia, the small trunk, and the broken program case without asking for a full explanation in the hallway. That alone nearly undid Sophronia. Your mother once arrived here in rain so fierce it soaked the ribbons off her bonnet, Mrs. Anning said, setting the case on a folded towel near the window. She said a woman should always know which doors will open before the storm starts. I told her she was too young to speak like that. She told me I was too old to be surprised. Sophronia tried to smile. That sounds like her. It was her. Mrs. Anning glanced at Sophronia's thumb. And that? A clasp. Objects with teeth usually have stories. Before Sophronia could answer, wheels slowed outside. Mrs. Anning looked toward the window, then back at Sophronia. Are you expecting a duke? Sophronia's heart gave one hard beat. No. Then there is one at my door by accident, which seems unlikely even in London. The maid showed Gareth St. Ormond into the parlour with the solemn disbelief of a servant who knew this moment would be discussed below stairs for years. He removed his hat, bowed to Mrs. Anning with correct respect, then to Sophronia with the same measured acknowledgement that had saved her from immediate disgrace at the opera. Mrs. Anning, Miss Lyle. Forgive the intrusion. I called first at Mrs. Vane's and was informed Miss Lyle had departed. Mrs. Anning adjusted her spectacles. Were you also informed why? In terms designed to prevent inquiry. Then you had better sit, Your Grace. Prevented inquiry is poor nourishment. Something almost like amusement passed through his eyes. He remained standing until both women had seated themselves. Sophronia noticed. She wished she had not, because noticing care made one vulnerable to needing it. My man of business made a preliminary search this morning, Gareth said. There is an old index connected to opera subscriptions and charitable boxes. The name Lyle appears faintly. In the corresponding ledger, it is scratched out. Sophronia's breath stopped. Mrs. Anning's hand closed around the arm of her chair. Clara, she whispered. Gareth's gaze moved to her. You knew Mrs. Lyle? I taught her before marriage. She had the cleanest ear of any girl I knew, and a habit of hiding pain behind good posture. Sophronia looked down. Her mother had left her more than a case. She had left her inheritance of silence. Gareth's attention shifted to Sophronia's hand. The small cut had opened again during packing and left a red mark near the edge of her glove. He did not reach across the space between them. May I see your hand? The question was simple. It was also impossible not to understand. Marcella would have taken her hand to inspect whether it inconvenienced the room. Lord Tarquin would have watched it to see what evidence it held. The Duke asked. Sophronia unfastened the damaged glove with fingers that felt suddenly clumsy and extended her hand across the small tea table. He unfolded a clean handkerchief and touched only the cloth to the cut, with such care that the restraint became louder than any tenderness spoken outright. His hand was steady. Hers was less so. The clasp did more harm than it appeared, he said. It has done less harm than the letter Mrs. Vane wished me to sign. His eyes lifted. You did not sign. No. Good. The word was quiet, not praise exactly. Recognition again. Sophronia drew a breath that trembled despite her best effort. You approve of women making themselves homeless. I approve of no one being forced to purchase shelter with a lie. Mrs. Anning made a small sound into her teacup, as if she had decided not to like him too much and failed. Gareth released Sophronia's hand at once when the cloth was secure. No lingering, no claim, only the warmth of where his fingers had steadied the linen, already fading and somehow still present. "Miss Lyle," he said, "I have arranged nothing in your name. I have paid no bill without permission. But Mrs. Anning has informed my man at the door that she has a leaking roof and a coal account she dislikes discussing. If you allow it, I can settle both as repayment of an old debt my mother's charity appears to owe this house." Sophronia stared at him. "That is very neatly done. I have a talent for appearing less sentimental than I am." The admission was so dry that she nearly smiled. Then the meaning reached her. He had offered help without making her owned by it. "Mrs. Anning?" Sophronia asked. The older woman sniffed. "My roof has been insulting me since Michaelmas. If His Grace wishes to quarrel with it, I won't stand in the way." Sophronia looked back at Gareth. "Then yes, thank you. There is more." His expression cooled, not toward her, but toward whatever lay beyond the room. The scratched ledger page was copied years ago by a clerk formerly employed by Lord Tarquin Fane. The name settled heavily among the tea things. Mrs. Anning closed her eyes. Sophronia pressed her bandaged thumb against her palm. Then he knew. I cannot yet prove what he knew. Gareth's voice remained controlled, but he was close enough to the record to fear what your mother preserved. Sophronia turned toward the window. Bloomsbury looked modest under the lowering sky, its brick fronts damp with evening, its respectability thinner than Mayfair's, but kinder for needing less polish. She had lost one roof today. She had gained a clue, a witness, and the frightening possibility that her mother had been wronged by people still powerful enough to punish the daughter. "Your Grace," she said, still looking outward, "if I continue, they will not stop at whispers." No, his honesty steadied her more than comfort would have done. "And you?" "I will not stop at whispers either." Sophronia turned back. He was not smiling. He looked, as he had at the opera, like a man who had seen the knife enter the room. Only now, at last, he had begun to follow the hand that held it. The invitation arrived with more dignity than safety. It came on thick cream paper to Mrs. Anning's Bloomsbury lodging, sealed not with the Duke of Keldrake's crest, but with the modest stamp of the Hanover Square Musical Benevolent Society, which made Sophronia distrust it less and fear it more. Respectability, she had learned, often wore plain paper when it meant to do complicated harm. Mrs. Anning read the note twice beside the breakfast tray, spectacles low on her nose, while Sophronia stood near the window with the cracked tortoise-shell program case held beneath one arm and her injured thumb wrapped in a neat strip of linen. The cut had stopped bleeding. It still stung whenever she pressed the silver swan clasp closed, as if the object wished to remind her that memory had edges. "A morning musicale," Mrs. Anning said at last. "Old patrons, retired singers, committee ladies, and enough titled persons to make truth nervous." Sophronia took the paper. The words were polite. Miss Lyle was invited in recognition of recent inquiries concerning historic subscriptions to attend a small musicale at Lady Wellmere's rooms near Hanover Square. His Grace, the Duke of Keldrake, had added a separate note below, in his own spare hand. "Mrs. Anning has kindly agreed to accompany you if you wish to attend. I will be present, but I will not answer for you unless you ask it." Sophronia read that final sentence more than once. It should not have affected her. It was only ink. Yet, after years of people speaking around her, over her, and occasionally about her while she sat in the same room. The promise not to answer for her felt dangerously close to tenderness. "Well?" Mrs. Anning asked. "It's a trap," Sophronia said, naturally. "Most rooms with flowers are. Then I should go." Mrs. Anning's mouth twitched. "Your mother would have said the same thing, though she would have chosen a better bonnet." 2 hours later, the carriage, supplied by the Duke's household, stopped before Lady Wellmere's rooms, where the windows were open to the May air and the sound of a pianoforte drifted into the street like a practiced welcome. Sophronia wore her best grey gown, mended at the cuffs, with the programme case tucked safely in her reticule instead of displayed in her hand. Mrs. Anning descended first, with the authority of age and disapproval. Gareth St. Ormond was waiting inside the entrance hall, speaking with an elderly gentleman whose coat had been brushed shiny at the seams. The Duke turned before Sophronia reached him. He did not look at her gown as though measuring its poverty. He looked first at her face, then briefly at the bandage on her thumb. "Miss Lyle," he said. "Mrs. Anning." "Your Grace, Mrs." Anning replied. "We have come to be ambushed musically. Then I shall endeavour to see that the music is better than the ambush." Sophronia would have smiled if the room beyond him had not already begun to notice her. Lady Eulalie Fane stood near a harp, wearing pale blue silk and innocence arranged to perfection. Beside her, Lord Tarquin spoke with 2 committee gentlemen, his posture genial, his expression paternal. He glanced at Sophronia's reticule only once. That was enough. Gareth saw it too. He did not move closer to Sophronia. He simply shifted his position by half a pace, placing himself where Tarquin could not approach without acknowledging him first. It was a small act. It was also an answer to the promise in his note. Protection without possession. Lady Wellmere, a widow with diamonds at her throat and calculation in her eyes, greeted Sophronia, as though uncertain whether she was a guest or a contagion. "Miss Lyle, how pleasant that you could join us. Lady Eulalie has told us you possess a charming curiosity connected to the old opera boxes." "Lady Eulalie has seen very little of what I possess," Sophronia said. A few fans paused. Gareth's mouth remained still, but his eyes sharpened as if the sentence pleased him and worried him in equal measure. Eulalie approached with both hands extended in social warmth. "Miss Lyle, I hope you don't think me your enemy. I only feared you might be misled by an object whose history is difficult. Difficult histories are often the ones most in need of honest reading." Sophronia answered. Lord Tarquin's laugh rolled gently across the room. A handsome sentiment, yet family relics are poor guides to public claims. I have known many young ladies to discover importance in old boxes, ribbons, and scraps of paper after a little attention from rank. He did not say the Duke's name. He did not need to. Sophronia felt the room waiting for colour to rise in her face. She refused to give it. "Then perhaps old records are safer than old opinions, my lord." Mrs. Anning made a quiet sound that might have been a cough and might have been approval. Lady Wellmere intervened before the air could crack. "We are fortunate today to have Signora Belandi among us. She sang in London many years ago and may remember something of these old arrangements. Signora, did you not once benefit from a charitable box attached to the opera?" The retired singer sat near the pianoforte, her black gown plain but beautifully kept, her white hair dressed beneath a lace cap. Her eyes had the bright inward look of someone who had outlived applause and therefore no longer feared silence. "Many ladies benefited," she said. "Widows, daughters, a few wives whose husbands preferred cards to rent. The Swan Box was one such kindness," Sophronia's hand closed around her reticule. "The Swan Box," she repeated. Lady Eulalie lowered her eyes, but not before Sophronia saw the flash of irritation. Gareth did not speak. He stood near the mantel, still as dark stone, letting the name pass into the room, without being softened by ducal authority. It was endowed, Signora Belandi continued, for widowed musicians and their daughters, though not all were professional singers. Some had served music in quieter ways, copying, teaching, accompanying, hosting subscription evenings when society still remembered gratitude. Mrs. Anning's fingers tightened on her cane. Sophronia stepped nearer to the singer. "Do you remember Clara Lyle?" The name changed the old woman's face. Memory moved through it like light crossing water. Clara Fairn before marriage. Later, Mrs. Lyle. Yes, she had a fine hand at the pianoforte and a finer courage when kindness cost her something. Sophronia's throat tightened, but she kept her voice even. Was she connected to the Swan Box? She was named among its beneficiaries after her husband fell into difficulty. Then she stopped coming. Why? Signora Belandi looked toward Lord Tarquin. Not directly enough to accuse, but directly enough to matter, because a gentleman made the list disappear. The room lost its small noises. No fan moved. No teacup touched porcelain. Lord Tarquin smiled sadly, as if age had made the singer fanciful. "My dear Signora, memories from 20 years past are not ledgers." "No," the old woman said. "They are often cleaner." Eulalie moved then, quick enough to rescue, graceful enough to appear unhurried. How touching. But Miss Lyle must be careful. A charitable memory is not an inheritance, and one cannot force oneself into noble circles by claiming the misfortunes of one's mother. Sophronia felt the old wound open, not in her thumb now, but somewhere deeper. Her mother's name had just been spoken with respect for the first time in years, and Eulalie had tried to turn it into appetite. Gareth's gaze came to Sophronia, steady and waiting. He had promised not to answer unless asked. She understood suddenly that he was keeping that promise at cost. A duke could have ended the insult with one cold sentence. He did not. The space remained hers. Sophronia turned to Signora Belandi. "Madam, do you remember who kept the list?" There was a committee after the Duchess of Keldrake withdrew from public work. Papers moved. Men always appear when papers become useful. "And Lord Petherton?" Sophronia asked. A murmur passed through the room. Tarquin's smile thinned. Signora Belandi looked at him openly now. He was very useful. That was not proof. Sophronia knew it. Gareth knew it. Tarquin knew it most of all. For his confidence returned the moment the old singer stopped speaking. "Miss Lyle," he said, kindly enough to make cruelty respectable, "you are grieving an old family disappointment and mistaking it for conspiracy. No one condemns you for sentiment, but sentiment does not create entitlement. Nor does rank erase it," Sophronia said. Lady Wellmere gave a nervous laugh. "Perhaps we should have music." "An excellent suggestion," Eulalie said. "Music is safer than accusations." "For whom?" Mrs. Anning asked. This time Sophronia did smile, only slightly. As the first song began, Gareth came to stand near the chair beside hers. Not so near that propriety could be questioned, but near enough that Lord Tarquin's path to her was blocked without display. He did not look at her when he spoke. "You asked the right question." Sophronia kept her eyes on the singer. "I asked the only one I could bear. There will be more." "Questions?" "Attempts to make you regret asking them." She looked at him then. "I'm not certain I won't." His expression softened by the smallest degree. Courage rarely feels like certainty while it is being practiced. The words settled between them. quieter than the music and more difficult to dismiss. Sophronia looked away first, but not because she was ashamed. Because if she looked too long, she might begin to trust the steadiness there before she understood the danger of needing it. At the far side of the room, Lady Eulalie watched them with a smile that no longer pretended warmth. Lord Tarquin bent to whisper to a committee secretary, who took a folded notice from his pocket and left before the song ended. Sophronia saw the movement. So did Gareth. The next morning, the result arrived at Mrs. Anning's lodging, in print, not ink. A notice had circulated among patrons of the opera committee. Miss Lyle's claim to the Swan Box, questioned by committee. Sophronia read the words in the grey breakfast light with the programme case beside her hand. The room was silent except for Mrs. Anning's slow breath and the sound of a coal shifting in the grate. Then Sophronia folded the notice once, very carefully. Her mother's name had been spoken aloud yesterday. Today, society had answered by putting hers on trial. The printed notice looked smaller after the Duke arrived, which made it no less dangerous. Sophronia had placed it on Mrs. Anning's breakfast table beside the cracked tortoise-shell programme case, and, by the time Gareth St. Ormond was shown into the Bloomsbury parlour, the paper had already been read aloud twice, once in disbelief and once in anger. Miss Lyle's claim to the Swan Box, questioned by committee. Beneath that line, in language so courteous it seemed to bow, while cutting, the committee invited Miss Sophronia Lyle to present herself at a review of historic opera privileges and charitable subscription entitlements. It did not call her an impostor. It merely arranged a room where others might do so. Mrs. Anning stood by the mantel with her cane in both hands. They mean to make her defend herself before those who have already decided she is guilty. Gareth took the notice, read it once, and set it down with a quietness more alarming than haste. Yes, Sophronia looked at him. You do not soften bad news. Softened news has a habit of turning poisonous later. Then tell me the whole of it. His gaze lifted to hers. There was no opera light now, no crimson box, no public bow to make courage dramatic. There was only a morning room with worn carpet, cooling tea, and a woman being summoned to prove she had not invented her mother's life. If you attend alone, he said, they will call it desperation. If you refuse to attend, they will call it guilt. If I accompany you without preparation, they will say, you manufactured a claim to secure ducal favour. Every door has been arranged to open into the same accusation. Mrs. Anning muttered, clever devils. Sophronia folded her hands over the programme case. The linen on her thumb was clean, though the skin beneath still pulled when she moved. And if you do nothing, then they will decide the room before you enter it. He spoke without flourish, which made the words harder to dismiss. I can accompany you publicly. My presence would prevent open insult, and make every whisper about you, Sophronia said. About us. Something changed in the air after that small word. Not scandal, not intimacy. Awareness. Gareth did not look away. Neither did she. Mrs. Anning, who had the mercy of age and the curiosity of a former music teacher, suddenly found the coal scuttle deserving of inspection. I did not mean to imply impropriety, Sophronia said. You implied consequence, Gareth answered. That is wiser. Then I must refuse your escort for now. His face did not harden, but stillness entered it. For now, I need documents before I need display. I need to know what a perpetual subscription means. I need to know whether a daughter may inherit what was named to her mother. I need to know whether the committee has any authority to question me without producing the original record. I do not need to be carried into the room under your title and told afterward that I was saved." Mrs. Anning turned from the coal scuttle with satisfaction plain in her eyes. Gareth was silent long enough for Sophronia to wonder whether she had gone too far. Then he inclined his head. "Very well, we begin with the solicitor." The solicitor's chambers near Lincoln's Inn smelled of dust, leather, and paper that had outlived the men who first folded it. Mr. Vale, a narrow gentleman with careful whiskers and eyes that brightened at the word perpetuity, received them in a room lined with shelves and caution. Mrs. Anning sat beside Sophronia, and Gareth stood near the window until Mr. Vale insisted that even dukes might use chairs without lowering the law. The counterfoil was placed on a square of clean paper. Sophronia had surrendered it to the table only after making certain that Gareth saw the movement, not to him, to the evidence. Lyle, Swan Box, paid in perpetuity, Mr. Vale read, a curious phrase. Not impossible. Private charitable subscription boxes were sometimes endowed for named use, though the terms depend upon the instrument creating the endowment. Could a daughter inherit her mother's right? Sophronia asked. If the right attached to a family beneficiary line, possibly. If it was personal to Mrs. Lyle, perhaps not. If the annuity and seat were held in trust for widowed musicians and their daughters, then Miss Lyle may have a stronger claim than the committee wishes to admit. He looked over his spectacles, but a counterfoil alone will not settle it. What will? Gareth asked. The original subscription book, the committee ledger, any duplicate index held by a founding patron, receipts of annuity payment, correspondence showing deliberate removal, and, if your enemies are foolish, a contradiction in their own notices. They are many things, Mrs. Anning said, but I don't yet know if foolish is one. Mr. Vale folded his hands. Then we shall hope arrogance does the work of foolishness. It often does in respectable families. Sophronia almost smiled, but the room had become too real for amusement. The law did not yet vindicate her. It only gave names to the doors still locked. Mr. Vale made a careful copy of the counterfoil wording and returned the original to Sophronia. Gareth watched that return with visible approval, as if the solicitor had passed an unspoken test. The original remains with Miss Lyle, he said, unless she chooses otherwise. Mr. Vale nodded. Naturally, naturally. Sophronia wondered how many women had heard that word only after a powerful man required others to use it. When they left the chambers, London had turned damp and grey, the kind of afternoon that made carriage windows blur at the edges. Mrs. Anning accepted a ride back in a hired coach with Mr. Vale's clerk, claiming she had an errand for cough lozenges and no wish to watch two young people pretend not to speak. Sophronia objected. Mrs. Anning ignored her with the serene ruthlessness of the elderly, so Sophronia found herself in the Keldrake carriage, seated opposite the Duke, the programme case in her lap and a thick silence between them. A maid from Mrs. Anning's lodging sat properly beside the forward seat, drowsy and wide-eyed by turns, preserving propriety with her presence. Rain tapped the roof. Wheels moved steadily over stone. For several minutes, neither Sophronia nor Gareth spoke. Then he said, "You were right to refuse my escort. You say that as if it cost you something." It did. She looked up. His face remained controlled, but his hand rested on his knee with the fingers slightly curled, as if he had stopped himself from closing them. "I am accustomed to ending harm by entering a room," he said. "It is efficient. It is also arrogant when the harm belongs to someone else." Sophronia turned the programme case beneath her hands. "I am accustomed to harm being ended only after I agree to be quiet about it. Then we are both poorly trained for this." The dryness in his voice surprised a small laugh from her. It was brief, but real enough to change his eyes. Not soften them exactly. Warm them at the edges. The carriage lurched over a rut. The program case slid from Sophronia's lap before she caught it. Gareth moved at the same instant, his hand closing not over hers, but beneath it, steadying the case from falling. Their gloved fingers touched around the cracked tortoise shell. The contact was slight, necessary. Then it should have ended. He stilled, waiting for her to withdraw. Sophronia did not. The rain continued its patient tapping. The maid looked determinedly at the opposite window. Sophronia felt the steadiness of his hand through 2 layers of glove and one trembling object. It did not command. It did not pull. It simply remained, because she had allowed it to remain. "I am afraid," she said so quietly, the words nearly became part of the rain. "Not of the committee. Not exactly. I am afraid they will make me appear as they have always wished me to be, grasping, ungrateful. A woman reaching above her station because she cannot bear the one she has." His hand did not tighten. "Are you reaching above your station? I do not know where my station is if my mother's name was cut out of it. Then perhaps the question is not whether you reach too high." His gaze held hers, across the dim carriage. "Perhaps it is who profited by making you stand too low." The words entered her slowly. She had spent years folding herself into corners, believing humility and survival were the same discipline. Now this man, who owned rooms by entering them, was asking who had arranged the corner. Sophronia looked down at their hands. Her fingers were still resting against his. It would be proper to move. It would be safer. Instead, she let one breath pass, then another. "If I attend the committee," she said, "I speak first. Yes, you do not correct me unless I ask. No, you do not make my claim sound more respectable by making it yours. Never again, if I can help it." The phrase struck her. Again, though he had not yet committed the greater mistake waiting for him in days to come. Perhaps some part of him already understood the temptation. Perhaps she did too. At last, she drew her hand back, not because she wished to, but because choosing when to release mattered as much as choosing when to stay. Gareth let her go at once. By the time the carriage reached Bloomsbury, the rain had thinned to mist. Mrs. Anning was waiting at the window, not even pretending she had missed their arrival. As Sophronia stepped down, a boy in a damp cap pushed past the footman and thrust a folded paper toward her. "For Miss Lyle, from the committee." The footman caught him before he could run. But the boy had already done his errand. Sophronia opened the paper under the carriage lamp. The words swam, then sharpened. "By order of the Swan Box Review Committee, tomorrow's examination will be held at Petherton House. Lord Tarquin Fane to preside." She looked at Gareth. The rain had left dark drops on his coat, but he did not seem to notice. His expression had gone still in that dangerous way she knew now. Attention with purpose. "They have moved the room," she said. "No," he answered. "They have revealed the battlefield." Petherton House had been built to make doubt feel impertinent. Its white stone front looked down on damp May Street with serene authority, and the footman who admitted Sophronia did so with the expression of a man opening a door not to a guest, but to a difficulty. Mrs. Anning entered at her side, her cane striking the marble once with deliberate sound. Behind them came Gareth St, Ormond, Duke of Keldrake, not as escort in the romantic sense that London might devour, but as a founding patron whose family name could not politely be refused. That distinction mattered. Sophronia repeated it silently as they crossed the hall. It did not stop the whispers from reaching her. Dependent. Ambitious. The opera girl. The one with the old case. The review had been arranged in Lord Tarquin Fane's long saloon, beneath portraits of Fane ancestors, who appeared to have disapproved of everyone since the reign of Queen Anne. A table stood near the windows. On it lay a large leather ledger, a silver inkwell, several folded notices, and enough polished respectability to hang an innocent person with clean hands. Lady Eulalie stood beside the table in ivory muslin, pale and luminous, her expression full of tender concern. Mrs. Marcella Vane was already present, seated near two committee ladies, wearing the sorrowful composure of a woman who had been forced to condemn a relative for that relative's own good. Sophronia's stomach tightened, but her face did not change. The program case rested in her reticule, the cracked silver swan clasp wrapped in linen so it would not catch, and the counterfoil lay hidden inside as before. She had not surrendered it to anyone, not even to the Duke. Lord Tarquin rose with stately warmth. Miss Lyle, Mrs. Anning, Your Grace, how grateful we are that this matter may be reviewed calmly. Calmly is not the same as fairly, Mrs. Anning said. A chair leg scraped. Someone coughed. Tarquin's smile remained. We shall endeavour to provide both. Gareth stood near the mantel, not beside Sophronia, not behind her, but where she could see him if she chose to turn. He had kept his promise so far. He had not spoken for her. He had not made her claim his. That steadied her more than his title would have done. Tarquin gestured to the ledger. The committee has examined the principal opera box records in our possession. The Swan Box, as Miss Lyles has styled it, was indeed a charitable arrangement of some age, but no current or valid entitlement appears in the name of Lyle. He opened the ledger with ceremonial care. Sophronia saw the page from several paces away. A column of names, dates, payments, a neat blank space where something had been scraped, washed, and overwritten. Her pulse struck once hard. The alteration was visible if one expected honesty to leave scars. May I see the page? She asked. In due course, Tarquin replied. The page is before the committee. I am before the committee. A faint rustle passed through the room. Halali lowered her lashes, hiding a smile. Miss Lyle, no one wishes to distress you. But it is difficult when a young lady arrives with a mysterious scrap, hints at old rights, accepts extraordinary public notice from a duke, and then asks society to believe that all of this is only filial devotion. Sophronia turned to her. What else would you call a daughter asking why her mother's name vanished? Imagination, Eulalie said softly. Or ambition dressed in mourning. Mrs. Anning shifted, but Sophronia did not let the older woman answer. This wound was hers. My mother is dead, Lady Eulalie. She cannot be flattered by my ambition, nor embarrassed by my persistence. Marcella sighed for the room. You see, poor Sophronia has always had feeling beyond prudence. In my house, she was treated with every consideration. But she had a tendency to misunderstand kindness as obligation. Sophronia looked at her former protector. Did I misunderstand the letter you asked me to sign? Marcella's fan stilled. Tarquin intervened before the question could deepen. We are not here to discuss domestic disagreements. We are here to establish whether Miss Lyle has any foundation for implying entitlement to a private charitable privilege. He lifted a paper. Further, it has been suggested to this committee that Miss Lyle's claim arose only after she drew His Grace's attention at the opera. That fact creates an appearance no modest woman would welcome. There it was. The accusation without the vulgarity of naming it. Sophronia had trapped a duke's notice, then used it to climb. Heat crept up her throat, but she kept her hands loose. Gareth's face turned colder. He moved one step, then stopped himself. She saw the effort. So did Tarquin, whose eyes flickered with satisfaction. "I did not draw his grace's attention," Sophronia said. "I answered his note." "A distinction of little comfort," Eulalie murmured. "It comforted me," Sophronia replied. The room went still again. Gareth's gaze met hers for one brief instant. Not rescue. Recognition. Tarquin closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Miss Lyle, the committee is prepared to be generous. If you acknowledge that you possess no proven right, that your remarks at the opera were made in confusion, and that the old counterfoil, if it exists, was misread by you, this matter may close without further injury to your name." "My name has already been injured," Sophronia said. "That is because you lifted it above its place," Marcella said, with a tremor that made cruelty sound like grief. "I have known this young woman for years. Her late father left debts and disappointments. Her mother filled her head with old songs and impossible refinements. Sophronia has always wanted to belong where she was merely tolerated." The words did their work. Sophronia felt them enter the room and settle into faces. Not everyone believed them, perhaps, but many recognized the shape. A poor relation dreaming above herself. A dependent mistaking courtesy for claim. A woman asking for more than had been allotted. Sophronia looked at the ledger. "Then show me where my mother's name was removed." Tarquin's expression hardened for the first time. "Removed? The page is altered. Careful, Miss Lyle." "I am being careful. You are accusing gentlemen of fraud." "No," she said. "I am asking why honesty needed a knife." The silence that followed had weight. A committee lady put one hand to her throat. Eulalie's color sharpened. Tarquin looked toward Gareth, perhaps expecting him to rebuke her impropriety. Gareth did not. He stood like a drawn line, every inch of him restrained. Then Tarquin made his mistake. "Your Grace," he said, "surely you must see the difficulty. Miss Lyle's reputation may yet be protected if she is guided firmly. You are a man of rank. You understand the danger of allowing public feeling to outrun fact." Gareth looked at Sophronia, not at Tarquin, at her. She saw fury in him, leashed so tightly it seemed almost calm. She also saw the flaw beneath it, the instinct to step between, to end the hunt by placing his name over hers like a shield. For one heartbeat, she wished he would. She was so tired. Then he spoke. "Miss Lyle is under my protection." The room inhaled. Sophronia went cold. Gareth continued, each word carrying the force of a public notice. "More than that, I am formally courting her. Any insult offered to her from this moment will be understood accordingly." Marcella gasped. Eulalie's face emptied. Tarquin's eyes flashed, not with defeat, but calculation. Around the saloon, the committee's hostility collapsed into astonished rearrangement. Sophronia remained standing, the program case heavy in her reticule, the cut on her thumb throbbing beneath its linen. Protection had arrived, powerful, public, ruinously effective, and it had taken her choice with it. She curtsied because every eye demanded some response. "Your Grace honors me," she said, and heard how calm she sounded. That calm was the last mercy she could give them both. The review dissolved soon after into murmurs, rearranged faces, and Tarquin's careful promise to continue the matter when tempers had cooled. Mrs. Anning took Sophronia's arm as they left the saloon. But in the shadowed passage beyond, Sophronia stopped and turned to the Duke. No one else stood close enough to hear. His expression changed the moment he saw her face. Perhaps he had expected gratitude. Perhaps he had already begun to understand. "Miss Lyle," he said, "I know what you intended." Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that. "You wished to stop them from destroying me." "Yes. And so you decided where I belonged before asking me." The words struck him. She saw it. Not visibly to others, perhaps, but enough. His eyes darkened, and the proud angle of his head altered by a fraction. "I gave them a reason to stop. You gave them a reason to say my claim began and ended with you." He said nothing. That silence was worse than defense, because it meant he heard her. Sophronia reached into her reticule and touched the program case, kneading the hard shape of it to remain herself. "I have spent half my life being placed at the back of boxes, at the edge of tables, in rooms where I was useful but never rightful. Today you moved me again, only into a kinder position." Sophronia. It was the first time he had used her name without Miss Lyle. It might have undone her if she had let it. "Don't," she said softly. "Not yet." She curtsied again, not to wound him, but to preserve the distance his kindness had made necessary. Mrs. Anning led her out. That night, in the small Bloomsbury room, where the ceiling sloped and the window admitted more fog than air, Sophronia opened the program case beneath a single candle. The silver swan clasp resisted, then yielded. The hidden counterfoil unfolded further than it had before, and inside the crease, in Clara Lyle's small faded hand, appeared a line Sophronia had not seen. "The duplicate list is at Keldrake." Sophronia sat motionless while the candle trembled beside her. The Duke's house held the next truth, and now, because of what he had done, going there would look to London like surrender. Keldrake House did not look like a place that had ever misplaced a name. Its iron gates, opened onto a Mayfair courtyard, swept so clean that even the rain seemed reluctant to mark it, and its pale, stone front held the composed severity of a family that had kept records, titles, portraits, and secrets in their proper rooms for generations. Sophronia stepped from the carriage with Mrs. Anning beside her, and the cracked tortoise-shell program case held close beneath her cloak. The morning after Petherton House had left London hungry. Already, the gossip would be running ahead of them. The dependent Miss Lyle, now under the Duke's protection, called to his private residence. Even with Mrs. Anning present, even with the hour respectable, even with every rule of propriety observed, society would season the truth until it tasted like scandal. Gareth St. Ormond waited in the entrance hall. He did not come forward too quickly. He did not offer his hand. He bowed to Mrs. Anning, then to Sophronia, and the restraint in that simple order told her he understood more than he had yesterday. "Mrs. Anning, Miss Lyle." "Thank you for coming." Mrs. Anning looked him over as if he were a student who had played the wrong note in public. "We came because Clara's message said the duplicate list is here, Your Grace, not because your announcement yesterday was wise." A footman at the far end of the hall discovered great interest in the wall. Gareth did not flinch. "No," he said, "it was not." Sophronia had prepared herself for politeness, for explanation, perhaps even for the polished regret of a gentleman who wished discomfort to pass quickly. She had not prepared for those 3 words. He turned to her fully. "Before I show you any archive, I owe you an apology spoken plainly. Yesterday, I saw them arranging a public ruin and chose the fastest weapon I possessed. My name." His mouth tightened. "I told myself I was shielding you. In truth, I took your choice and placed it beneath my protection as if that made it safer. It did not. It made your truth appear dependent upon me, and it repeated the very injury you were fighting." The hall went very quiet. Sophronia felt Mrs. Anning still beside her. Somewhere beyond the staircase, A clock marked the hour with one soft note. "You understand that now?" Sophronia asked. "I understood it when you told me. I disliked understanding it. That doesn't make it less true." The faintest dryness in his voice almost hurt, because it made him human when anger would have been easier to resist. "I cannot undo the announcement," he continued. "I can publicly correct how I made it, when you permit me. I can also withdraw any suggestion of courtship if you wish it withdrawn." The word withdraw moved through her with an ache she had not expected. She did not want him gone. That was the danger. She wanted him present without being placed under him. "I do not know yet what I wish," she said. "Then I shall not decide it for you." Mrs. Anning gave a small, satisfied sniff. Progress. Gareth's eyes warmed by a fraction. "I am relieved to meet your standard, madam, even briefly. Don't grow comfortable." He led them not to a drawing room, but through a quieter corridor, where portraits darkened the walls, and the house seemed to lower its voice. Sophronia walked beneath painted duchesses and powdered dukes, aware of the program case beneath her fingers and of the space Gareth kept between them. Not coldness, care. That distinction unsettled her more than closeness might have done. The archive room lay behind two locked doors and smelled of old leather, beeswax, and dust warmed by a small coal fire. A long table had been cleared. On it rested several folios, a narrow subscription cabinet, and a brass lamp. Gareth unlocked the cabinet himself. "My mother chaired several charitable committees before her health failed. I knew of the Musical Benevolent Society in general terms. I did not know of the Swan Box until your counterfoil forced the name into daylight." Sophronia looked at the neat rows of bundles tied with faded tape. "Your mother knew mine?" "Possibly, or she knew of her. My mother's papers were kept with more loyalty than order." Mrs. Anning moved closer to a stack of letters. "That is often the way with women's work. Men call it disorder when they mean unpaid labor." Gareth accepted the rebuke without defense and drew out a thin packet marked Opera Charities, 1821 to 1834. Sophronia's breath shortened. Her mother had been alive inside those dates. Her father, too, before disgrace and debt, had turned his name into something relatives, lowered their voices around. Gareth untied the tape and spread the contents with care. Receipts, notes, lists of boxes, names of widows, daughters, teachers, accompanists. Sophronia read quickly, searching for Lyle, for Clara, for any proof that her mother had not imagined belonging. Nothing. Then Mrs. Anning tapped one sheet with her cane tip. There, the edge. It was an index page, burned along the bottom as though once rescued from a grate or candle. The damage had eaten several lines, but midway down, in ink faded to brown, stood a name, Clara Lyle. Beside it, a notation, Swan Box annuity, transferred to committee custody. T.F. Sophronia did not touch the paper. If she touched it, she feared it might vanish, or worse, remain real. "T.F., she said. "Tarquin Fane," Gareth answered. His voice was low. "The initials are not proof alone, but they are direction." Mrs. Anning sank into a chair. "Clara said there had been papers. She would never tell me where. Only that if Sophronia ever needed a place, there had once been one bought honestly for her." The room tilted quietly. Not enough for Sophronia to fall, enough for her to grip the table edge. "My mother knew." "Yes," Mrs. Anning whispered, "and she feared knowledge would cost you more than ignorance while you were a child." Sophronia stared at the burned edge. Someone had tried to destroy this. Not entirely. Enough to make truth limp. Who removed the full list? Gareth turned to another bundle, jaw set. "That is what we have to learn. He searched with the precision of a man forcing fury into usefulness. A servant entered with tea and was dismissed. The clock struck once, then the half-hour. Sophronia found 2 references to the Swan Box, both partial. Gareth found a receipt for cabinet repairs dated 10 years earlier. Mrs. Anning found Clara's married name in a faded memorandum of widowed beneficiaries. But the complete duplicate list was absent. At last, Gareth rang for the house steward, an elderly man named Mr. Bell, who entered with the expression of one prepared to be loyal and truthful in that order. "Do you remember a locked folio marked with a silver swan?" Gareth asked. Mr. Bell's eyes narrowed with effort. "Aye, your grace. Not lately, but years ago. Lord Petherton borrowed it after her grace's death, saying the committee required reconciliation of old charitable records. Your late father permitted it." Gareth went still. "It was never returned?" "Not to my knowledge, your grace," I asked once. "Lord Petherton's man said it had been mislaid among committee papers." Sophronia heard the word as if it had been struck from metal. Mislaid. A woman's name could be mislaid. An annuity could be mislaid. A daughter's place could be mislaid until she looked impertinent for asking where it had gone. The steward withdrew. Mrs. Anning, pale with anger, gathered the partial papers into order with hands that shook. Gareth stood on the other side of the table, his face controlled, but something in him had altered. The Duke, who had sent a note ordering her to withdraw, felt very far away. The man before her looked as if his own house had betrayed her mother by keeping a door locked too long. "Sophronia," he said quietly, "I am sorry." She should have said he was not responsible for every act of men older than he was. She should have kept distance. She should have remembered yesterday, when his protection had become a cage lined with velvet. Instead, the sound of her name in that room, among her mother's half-burned proofs, broke something tired inside her. "Everyone kept a record," she whispered. "The opera, your house, the committee, Lord Petherton. Everyone kept a record except my family. We only kept the shame." Gareth moved one step, then stopped. "May I come nearer?" The question nearly undid her, because he asked it when grief had made permission most easy to steal. Sophronia looked at him through the blur she refused to let fall. "Yes." He came around the table not quickly. Not as a rescuer claiming a collapse, as a man approaching a wound that had the right to refuse him. "May I?" he asked again, softer now. Sophronia answered, not with words, but by stepping toward him. His arms closed around her with careful restraint, and for a moment she stood rigid inside the unfamiliar safety of being held without being managed. Then Mrs. Anning turned tactfully toward the window, and Sophronia let her forehead rest against the dark wool of his coat. His hand settled between her shoulders, still, warm, asking nothing. She placed her own hands lightly against him, choosing the embrace rather than merely enduring it. No one spoke. The archive fire shifted. Paper waited on the table. Her mother's name remained visible behind them, fragile and stubborn as a candle in a draught. When Sophronia drew back, Gareth released her at once. His eyes searched her face, but he did not ask for gratitude. That made her trust the moment more. "The folio is at Petherton House," she said, her voice steadier. "Yes. Then we must go where he keeps what he stole." Gareth looked toward the burned-edge index, then back to her. "Not I, if you still choose it." Sophronia touched the program case in her reticule. The clasp was cracked. The counterfoil was hidden. Her mother's name was no longer only a whisper. "I choose it," she said, "and this time, your grace, I speak first." His answer came without hesitation. Always. The borrowed opera score arrived at Mrs. Anning's lodging before breakfast, which was how Sophronia knew. The invitation to Petherton House had already begun lying. It came wrapped in brown paper, tied with blue thread, and accompanied by a note from Lady Eulalie Fane, in a hand so graceful it seemed incapable of malice. My dear Miss Lyle, in the confusion of recent committee matters, I find that a score belonging to our small musical circle was delivered among Mrs. Anning's things. Would you be so kind as to return it this afternoon? We might then end these misunderstandings with more civility than they began. Mrs. Anning read it once and snorted. A spider has written to ask whether the fly prefers the parlor or the dining room. Sophronia stood beside the table with the cracked tortoise-shell program case open before her. The hidden counterfoil remained inside the loosened clasp, still safe, still hers. Her thumb had nearly healed, though the skin pulled when she fastened buttons. Then I should bring the score to the spider, she said. You should bring a broom. I shall bring a witness, Gareth St. Ormond came precisely at 2, neither early enough to look anxious, nor late enough to suggest carelessness. He entered the Bloomsbury parlour with a solicitor's folded memorandum in one hand and an expression that told Sophronia he had slept little. Behind him waited Mrs. Harcourt, a widowed acquaintance of Mrs. Anning's, respectable enough to quiet scandal and stern enough to frighten footmen into telling the truth by mistake. Gareth had also stationed Mr. Vale's clerk in a hired carriage at the end of Petherton Street, close enough to receive a message, not close enough to make the visit appear an invasion. I can still go in your place, Gareth said after Mrs. Anning explained the note. Sophronia tied the blue thread around the score again. No. I expected that answer. Then why offer? Because fear sometimes disguises itself as strategy, and I wanted to be certain mine had not done so. She looked at him then. Since Keldrake House, since the archive room and the embrace neither of them had named afterward, there was a new difficulty in looking at him. He no longer appeared only powerful. He appeared careful. That was far more dangerous. You are afraid? She asked. Yes. The single word stripped the room of performance. Mrs. Anning looked down at her tea, Sophronia's hands stilled on the brown paper. For the folio? For you. He did not step closer. He did not soften the admission with wit. But fear is not permission to command. You said you would speak first. You said you chose this. I remember. Sophronia felt the words settle where yesterday's hurt had been, not healing everything. Nothing honest healed that quickly, but they steadied the edges. At Petherton House, the afternoon light lay cold on the steps, and the footman who opened the door looked past Sophronia first, searching for the Duke. Gareth stood several paces behind with Mrs. Harcourt, exactly far enough to let Sophronia's purpose enter before his title. Mrs. Anning had remained at home to keep the counterfoil safe until Sophronia chose to carry it again. A decision that had made the old woman grumble and then kiss Sophronia's cheek, as if sending her to battle with better manners. The program case stayed in Sophronia's reticule, empty of the counterfoil for the first time since the opera, but still heavy with meaning. Its cracked clasp pressed against her palm. Miss Lyle, the footman said at last. Lady Eulalie is in the small music room. Then I shall return her score there. The hall smelled of lilies and polish. Petherton portraits watched with pale inherited boredom. Sophronia walked past them with the score held plainly in both hands. No hiding, no stealth. A woman returning borrowed music had every right to cross a hall. She repeated that truth until her breathing obeyed it. Lady Eulalie received her in a room lined with music cabinets and gilt chairs too delicate for comfort. How good of you to come. She wore rose-colored silk today, chosen to suggest injured gentleness. I worried you might think me unkind after yesterday. You have given me several opportunities. Eulalie's smile paused, then resumed. Still sharp. How exhausting it must be to defend every word. Less exhausting than surrendering them. Sophronia placed the score on the pianoforte. Her eyes moved once around the room, shelves of bound music, a harp, a narrow cabinet near the inner wall, its brass lock shaped like a shell. No silver swan. Not here. You are looking for something, Eulalie said. Only the proper place for the score. It is there. Eulalie pointed to the music cabinet, the lower shelf. Sophronia crossed to it slowly. The cabinet smelled of paper and rosin. As she opened the lower door, a maid entered carrying coal scuttles for the small grate. She was young, freckled, and so frightened by Sophronia's glance that she nearly dropped the handle. On her left cuff, barely visible beneath soot, was a stitched silver swan. Sophronia slid the score into place and spoke without turning. Does Lord Petherton keep many old folios in this room? The maid froze. Eulalie laughed. Miss Lyle, do you interrogate servants wherever you go? Only when ladies are too practiced. The maid's eyes darted to the inner door. Eulalie stepped forward, but Mrs. Harcourt's firm voice sounded from the hall. Lady Eulalie, your footman has abandoned me beneath a portrait of a gentleman with gout. I require rescue before I begin speaking to him. It was not subtle. It was magnificent. Eulalie's attention snapped away for one necessary second. In that second, the maid whispered, Not here, miss. The locked folios in his lordship's music cabinet. Library passage, silver swan label. He said it goes before the review. Then she bent over the coal as if the floor had swallowed her voice. Sophronia closed the music cabinet gently. A locked folio, library passage, silver swan label, before the review. She had what she needed, and not a scrap more than she could honestly claim to have heard. Eulalie returned with suspicion sharpened beneath her smile. How long a time you require for one score? Old bindings deserve care. Do they? I thought you preferred old claims. Sophronia turned toward her. I prefer old wrongs to stop being useful. Color touched Eulalie's cheeks. You are making a grave mistake. His Grace may find defiance novel for an evening, perhaps even for a week, but dukes marry women whose names strengthen theirs. They don't marry questions. The words should not have struck. They did, not because Sophronia wanted a proposal. She did not yet, perhaps not ever, if it came as another form of rescue. But some secret part of her had begun to wonder what it would be like to be looked at by Gareth when no one else was watching. That made Eulalie's cruelty land too near a fish Sophronia had not permitted herself to examine. Then, I shall remain a question, she said. Questions have opened more doors than flattery. As she left the music room, Gareth was waiting near the hall table, speaking with Lord Tarquin as if discussing weather. Nothing in his posture changed when Sophronia appeared, but she saw his eyes ask what his mouth could not. Did you find it? Tarquin stood between them, genial and watchful. Miss Lyle, I trust my daughter has soothed some of yesterday's regrettable heat. Lady Eulalie is very skilled at creating warmth, my lord. Gareth's gaze flickered. Tarquin's smile cooled. Sophronia moved toward the outer door. She did not hurry. Hurrying made innocence look hunted. Yet, as she passed Gareth, the weight of what she had learned pressed suddenly against her ribs. The folio was here. The page might still be here. The name Clara Lyle might be written inside, waiting in a house that wished it dead. Before fear could harden into visible tremor, Sophronia let her gloved fingers touch the edge of Gareth's sleeve, briefly, deliberately. No one watching could call it improper. No one not watching could understand it. He went still, receiving the touch as if it were a vow entrusted to cloth. Then she withdrew. His voice remained even as he addressed Tarquin. "Lord Petherton, I shall look forward to the committee's next review." "As shall I, Your Grace." Outside, beneath a pale sky, Sophronia entered the carriage with Mrs. Harcourt and only then allowed herself to breathe. Gareth did not join them. He remained behind long enough to make their departure unremarkable as planned. That evening, word reached Bloomsbury not by official notice, but through a maid who had a cousin in Mrs. Vane's kitchen, and a conscience stronger than her caution. Mrs. Marcella Vane had gone to Petherton House after dusk. There, in Lord Tarquin's small study, she had signed a statement declaring that Sophronia Lyle had invented the Swan Box story only after, attracting the Duke of Keldrake's notice, and that the old counterfoil, if produced, had likely been planted by Sophronia herself. Mrs. Anning cursed so softly it sounded like prayer. Sophronia sat at the table with her mother's counterfoil before her and the empty program case beside it. The villains had not found the truth, so they had begun manufacturing a woman who looked easier to condemn. Lord Tarquin Fane chose the hour before noon to offer the Duke of Keldrake a clean bargain, which told Gareth the Earl feared dirt. The message came to Keldrake House on Petherton paper, respectful in address, poisonous in purpose. Lord Petherton requested 10 private minutes with his grace, on a matter that might spare several families needless public discomfort. Gareth read it in his library while rain slid down the tall windows, and Mr. Vale's clerk waited with the latest memorandum from Bloomsbury. Sophronia's name appeared twice in that memorandum, once beside the counterfoil now secured in Mrs. Anning's keeping, once beside Marcella Vane's signed statement, copied by a kitchen maid brave enough to risk dismissal. Gareth folded the letter from Tarquin and felt an old instinct rise in him. End it. Command it. Crush the man quietly and spare Sophronia the next room of cruelty. Then he saw again her face in the passage at Petherton House, when she had said, "You gave them a reason to say my claim began and ended with you." Shame had a way of teaching memory if a man did not turn from it. "Show Lord Petherton in," Gareth said. Tarquin entered 10 minutes later with the mild gravity of a man attending a sick neighbor. His coat was perfect. His gloves were pearl grey. His smile carried sorrow already prepared for public use. "Your Grace, I come in friendship. Then you have travelled under an assumed name." Tarquin's smile thinned, but he sat when invited. "We are both men who understand institutions. They survive, because personal feeling is kept beneath public order. Is that what you call theft, when it has aged long enough? I call it caution, when a young woman of uncertain temper begins disturbing charitable records she cannot comprehend." Gareth rested one hand on the desk. "Speak plainly, gladly. Miss Lyle must withdraw her claim. You must withdraw your public interest in her. In return, the committee will record the matter as confusion over a sentimental object. Mrs. Vane's statement need not be circulated beyond necessary parties. Lady Eulalie will express sympathy. London will forget. And if I decline," Tarquin's eyes cooled, "then London will remember everything, that your mother's committee misplaced funds, that your family archive failed to preserve charitable trust papers, that you, after one theatrical exchange at the opera, attached yourself to an impoverished gentlewoman whose claim conveniently appeared after your notice. There are reform speeches, Your Grace, and then there are scandals. Men with influence must choose which they prefer. Gareth thought of the Swan Box, widowed musicians, daughters, women given a rightful seat and then robbed of it because paper could be cut, locked, and renamed. You are threatening Keldrake's name to hide your own. I am offering a marriage that would strengthen yours. Tarquin leaned back. Lady Eulalie admires you. Such an alliance would quiet everything. She is young, accomplished, and suitable. Miss Lyle is an accusation in a grey gown. The room went very still. Gareth looked at the Earl and understood with cold precision why Sophronia had survived so long by controlling her hands, her voice, even her breathing. Men like Tarquin trained the world to mistake restraint for weakness. Get out, Gareth said. Tarquin rose slowly. Consider carefully. If you choose Miss Lyle's version of justice, you will bring your mother's charity under examination. Good. Good. If my family failed those women, the failure should be known. If you exploited that failure, that will be known too. Tarquin's face hardened at last. You would risk your house for her? Gareth thought of Sophronia's fingers touching his sleeve for one brief second outside the music room. Not a plea, not dependence. A choice made under pressure. No, he said. I would risk comfort for truth. You mistake the two because you have purchased one with the other for too long. Tarquin left without bowing. Within the hour, Gareth was in Mr. Vale's chambers near Lincoln's Inn with Sophronia, Mrs. Anning, Mrs. Harcourt, and the documents laid carefully on the solicitor's table. He had sent for Sophronia only after Tarquin departed, and the message had contained one sentence. I have received a threat involving you, my house, and the Swan Box charity. I will make no decision until you hear it entire. Now she sat across from him in her grey gown, her injured thumb almost healed, her face composed enough to break him. The program case rested beside her hand. Mrs. Anning had brought the counterfoil wrapped in tissue and had placed it not before Gareth, but before Sophronia. Tell me, Sophronia said. He did. He repeated every word that mattered. Tarquin's bargain, Marcella's statement. The threat to make Keldrake charity records seem corrupt. The proposed marriage to Lady Eulalie, the promise that London would forget if Sophronia vanished properly this time. Her face did not change until he said Eulalie's name. Then something small closed behind her eyes. A suitable duchess, she said, in his account. And in yours? The question held no accusation. That made it worse. Gareth leaned forward, then stopped himself from reaching across the table. He had no right to seize forgiveness by appearing wounded. In mine, she is a woman Lord Petherton is using as part of a bargain. That does not make her innocent. It does make the bargain uglier. Sophronia looked down at the program case. And me. You are the person he is most afraid will speak. Mr. Vale cleared his throat gently. Miss Lyle, we must decide how to answer the next review. There are 3 practical courses. Gareth looked at Sophronia before speaking. You may withdraw. If you do, I will still pursue the records privately and protect you from further direct accusation as far as I can. You may allow Mr. Vale and me to expose the records without your presence, which may spare you the room, but weaken the moral force of your claim. Or you may fight publicly with all of us present and speak first. Mrs. Anning's cane gave one approving tap beneath the table. Sophronia did not answer at once. Outside the window, the muffled noise of legal London moved through rain and wheels. Inside, the evidence waited without pity. The counterfoil, the copy of the scratched ledger, the burned-edge Keldrake index, Marcella's false statement, the note threatening her father's name. The missing locked folio still at Petherton House. "If I withdraw," Sophronia said, "my mother remains a rumor." "Yes," Gareth said. "If you speak without me, they will say I invented courage for you." "Some will." "If I speak without you, they will say a duke gave charity to a woman who pleased him." His jaw tightened. "Yes." She looked at him then, fully. "Then I speak." No one moved. The simplicity of it entered the room like a bell. "I speak first," she continued. "I ask the questions. You may stand where they can see you, but not where they must look at you instead of me. Yes, if I falter, you do not rescue me before I ask. Yes, if they insult me, you do not turn the insult into courtship." A shadow crossed his face. No, never again. Something in her expression softened, not enough to erase pain, but enough to let him breathe. Mr. Vale arranged the papers with brisk relief. "Then we build the chain. The program case establishes origin. The counterfoil establishes the phrase. The scratched opera ledger establishes removal. The Keldrake burned edge index establishes an outside duplicate. Mrs. Vane's statement establishes the manufactured attack. The missing folio, if produced, may establish final entitlement and annuity." "If produced," Mrs. Anning said, "Tarquin will not produce it willingly." Gareth set down Tarquin's letter. "He is arranging a candlelight subscription review at Lady Eulalie's request. He believes he can display selected pages to prove Miss Lyle false." Sophronia's hand closed over the edge of the table. "Then he will bring the folio into a room with witnesses." "Yes, and if he has altered it," Mr. Vale adjusted his spectacles. "Alterations have habits. Ink, page order, stitching, cuts, pressure marks. Arrogance rarely mends paper as well as it tears it." Sophronia looked at each object in turn. Not one of them alone could save her. Together, they began to resemble a path. She reached across the table then, slowly enough that he could refuse if he wished, though she knew he would not. Her fingers found Gareth's hand. He stilled. The contact was quiet, gloved, and public enough to be proper in the company of witnesses, yet private enough to carry all the words neither of them could say before the truth was finished. "I am still afraid," she said. His hand turned beneath hers, not closing until she allowed it. "So am I." She looked at him, surprised. "You said that yesterday." "It remains true. Dukes are allowed repeated feelings then, only under solicitor's supervision." Mr. Vale murmured, "I shall enter no opinion on that point, Mrs." Anning laughed once, softly, and the sound loosened the room. Gareth's thumb did not move over Sophronia's hand. He made no claim. He gave only steadiness. "I would lose every comfortable silence I have ever kept," he said, "before I let yours be bought." Sophronia's eyes brightened, but she did not look away. "Then stand beside me. Always, if you choose it." She kept his hand for one more breath, then released it by her own decision. Mr. Vale tied the evidence copies into a narrow packet. The original counterfoil returned to Sophronia. The program case closed around emptiness for now, its cracked silver swan waiting to hold truth again. Before they left, a final message arrived from Petherton House. Lady Eulalie Fane requested the honor of Miss Lyle's presence at a candlelight subscription review the following evening, where the committee would display the records necessary to end all dispute. Sophronia read it without trembling. "They think they have written my ending," she said. Gareth looked at the invitation, then at her. "No, they have merely invited the witness." Lady Eulalie Fane's candlelight subscription review was arranged to look charitable enough for angels and private enough for cruelty. By the time Sophronia entered Petherton House the following evening, with Mrs. Anning on one side and Mrs. Harcourt on the other. The long saloon had been remade into a little theatre of judgment. Candles burned in silver branches along the walls. A pianoforte stood open near the far window. Chairs had been set in gentle half-circles for committee ladies, opera patrons, 2 solemn gentlemen, with subscription books, and Lord Tarquin Fane, who smiled at every arrival as if he had personally invented benevolence. On the central table lay the locked folio. Sophronia saw it at once. Brown leather, brass corners, a label darkened by age, and at the center of that label a small, tarnished silver swan. Her mother's erased name sat somewhere inside it, perhaps whole, perhaps cut, perhaps wounded beyond use. The program case rested in Sophronia's reticule, and the counterfoil, returned to its hidden place that afternoon, lay again beneath the cracked clasp. Its presence gave her no comfort. It gave her duty. Gareth St. Ormond stood near the mantel with Mr. Vale, not beside Sophronia, not before her. The distance was intentional. It told the room what he had promised at the solicitor's table. She would speak first. Still, when his eyes met hers across the candlelight, the noise of the saloon lowered inside her. Not vanished, nothing so easy, but steadied. He inclined his head, by the smallest degree, not a duke acknowledging a dependent woman before society, but a man keeping a promise. Lady Eulalie glided forward in pale green silk. "Miss Lyle, how brave of you to come. It would be discourteous to refuse an invitation written with such confidence," Sophronia said. Eulalie's smile brightened. "Confidence is easier when one has records. Then I hope tonight will be easy for truth." A nearby committee lady looked startled enough to fan herself. Lord Tarquin approached the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered only to settle an unfortunate confusion regarding the old Swan Box charity and its related subscriptions. No one wishes to injure Miss Lyle." "Then no one should find the evening difficult?" Mrs. Anning said. Tarquin ignored her with the discipline of long practice. "Lady Eulalie has graciously offered to assist by reading certain donor names from the restored folio. Miss Lyle, as the claimant, may observe." "Oh, father," Eulalie said, softly theatrical, "would it not be more generous to let Miss Lyle read them herself? Then no one can say we denied her a voice." Sophronia felt the trap click into place. They expected no Lyle name. They expected her to stand before their candles and read her own absence aloud. A year ago, perhaps even a week ago, humiliation might have forced the air from her lungs. Tonight, the humiliation clarified the room. "Thank you, Lady Eulalie," Sophronia said. "I will read." Gareth did not move, but his gaze sharpened. Mr. Vale adjusted his spectacles. Tarquin hesitated only a fraction before unlocking the folio and turning it toward her. "Careful. The binding is old. So are many injuries, my lord." Sophronia opened the folio with both hands. The pages smelled of dust and pressed damp. She read the columns as they appeared. Widow Elmsley, Mrs. Pryor, Miss Bellandy, 2 accompanists, a seamstress to the opera chorus, amounts paid, seat privileges, occasional annuities, no Clara Lyle. Eulalie stood close enough for her perfume to invade the page. "Do continue, Miss Lyle. We all admire perseverance." Sophronia turned another page. Still nothing. A whisper travelled behind her. Mrs. Vane, seated with folded hands and a martyr's drooping mouth, watched as if pitying a fever patient. Sophronia turned the next page and saw the cut. It was almost invisible because the repair had been done by someone skilled but hurried. One sheet had been slit along the inner margin, removed, and later placed back, with the upper edge reversed. The paper sat wrong against the stitching. The faint pressure of older ink showed through the wrong side. Her pulse did not quicken. It slowed. "This page has been reinserted incorrectly," she said. Tarquin stepped forward. "Impossible. No." She held the folio steady. "Merely inconvenient." Mr. Vale came nearer at her glance. "May I examine without touching, Miss Lyle?" "Yes." He bent over the page, then looked to the room. "The lady is correct. The sheet has been cut and returned with the reverse side facing inward. There is writing on the hidden side." Tarquin's hand shot toward the folio. Gareth moved before the Earl reached it. Not violently, not with spectacle. He placed himself between Tarquin and the table and said, "Witnesses first." The words cracked through the room. A footman was sent for more candles. Mr. Vale called Mrs. Harcourt, Signora Belandi, and 2 committed gentlemen to stand where they could see. Sophronia lifted the loosened edge with a paper knife Mr. Vale provided. The hidden side emerged inch by inch, brown ink appearing under the light like a drowned thing surfacing. Clara Lyle, Swan Box beneficiary, annuity paid in perpetuity. For one moment Sophronia could not hear. The room moved silently before her. Eulalie's face drained of its color. Mrs. Vane's fan slipped from her fingers. Tarquin made no sound at all. He only looked at the page with the flat hatred of a man seeing a buried witness rise. "Read it aloud," Mrs. Anning whispered. Sophronia did. Her voice held. Not loudly. Clearly. Each word crossed the candlelight and entered the room that had been arranged to erase her. When she finished, no one applauded. Truth, she discovered, did not sound like triumph at first. It sounded like people recalculating whom they feared. Tarquin recovered first. A damaged page proves nothing without context. Old charities often recorded names, later voided by committee authority. "Then, tomorrow, we shall discuss the authority," Sophronia said. "Tonight, we have established that my mother's name existed, where you said it did not." "Miss Lyle," he began. Gareth's voice cut in, quiet and final. Not another word at her expense. Sophronia looked at him. He had waited. He had let her speak. Only now, when the line had been read and the proof seen, had he stepped around the insult. Gratitude rose in her so swiftly that she had to turn away from it. The room fractured into anxious conversation. Mr. Vale took custody of the folio under protest from Tarquin and in the presence of witnesses. Lady Eulalie moved toward a side corridor, then stopped when Sophronia followed. "Did you know?" Sophronia asked softly. Eulalie's mouth trembled, but pride repaired it. "I knew there was danger in your little relic. I didn't know your mother would be so stubborn as to remain legible." "She had practice," Sophronia said. "So have I." Eulalie looked toward the saloon, where her father stood surrounded for the first time not by admiration but by questions. "You think this makes you safe?" "No, I think it makes me harder to bury." Sophronia left her there and stepped into the corridor. Only then did her knees threaten to fail. She gripped the wall, molding, furious at her body for recognizing danger after her voice had already survived it. Gareth appeared at the doorway, but did not cross the distance. "May I come nearer?" he asked. The question folded the archive room, the carriage, the opera, and every lesson of restraint into one breath. Sophronia nodded. He came to stand before her, leaving enough space for choice. Mrs. Anning's figure was visible at the far end of the corridor, speaking firmly to a servant and pointedly looking elsewhere. "You did it," Gareth said. "Not all of it. The line that mattered tonight." Sophronia looked down at her gloved hands. They were trembling now. When I saw her name, I wanted my mother to be alive long enough to know she had not vanished. Gareth's face changed. Not pity, pain shared without possession. "I think part of her knew you would find the rest. That is too kind. It's also possible. The answer broke a small breath from her, half laugh and half grief. He lifted her hand only after she gave it, and bent over it with a care so formal it became intimate. His lips touched the back of her glove, brief as a vow society could permit. Then he straightened, but did not release her until she chose whether to stay. Sophronia stepped closer. The movement was hers. His eyes searched her face, asking again without words. "Gareth," she said, and the use of his name changed the corridor more than candlelight could have done. "I'm not mistaking this for rescue. No, and I don't want gratitude to speak for me. Then, let nothing speak that you don't choose." She rose slightly, not enough for scandal, just enough for truth. He met her halfway. The kiss was brief, restrained, and silent. A touch of warmth in a cold corridor, while witnesses and consequences waited beyond the door. It did not end the danger. It did not settle the future. It gave neither of them ownership. When Sophronia drew back, Gareth let her go at once, but his eyes held what his hands did not. "After truth is finished," he said, voice low, "I have something plain to say." "Then finish it with me," she answered, "and I will hear you." Together they returned to the saloon. The folio lay open, beneath brighter candles, guarded by Mr. Vale and Mrs. Harcourt. Tarquin stood rigid near the table, his daughter pale behind him. Marcella clutching her fallen fan as if it might restore the world. Sophronia took the folio in both hands. This time no one stopped her. She faced Lord Petherton across the room he had built for her humiliation and said, "Lord Petherton, shall I read the line you cut from my mother's life?" "Read it, Miss Lyle," Lord Tarquin said, and for the first time since Sophronia had entered Petherton House, his voice was too smooth. Smoothness, she had learned, was often panic with gloves on. The candlelight trembled across the opened folio, across the old reversed page and the line cut from her mother's life, while every face in the saloon turned toward her as if the next breath belonged to rank or truth, and only one of them could keep it. Sophronia stood at the central table with the cracked tortoise-shell program case beside the folio, the silver swan clasp catching light along its broken wing. The counterfoil lay unfolded upon a square of clean paper. Mr. Vale stood to her left with the copied opera ledger. Gareth St, Ormond, Duke of Keldrake, stood to her right but half a pace behind, exactly where she had asked him to stand. Not before her, not over her, beside enough to be strength, behind enough not to steal the room. Sophronia placed one gloved finger below the line. Clara Lyle, Swan Box beneficiary, annuity paid in perpetuity. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The words had waited too long to shout. A murmur ran through the room, then broke against Mrs. Anning's cane striking once upon the floor. "Again," the old woman said, her voice shaking with fury and grief. Sophronia read it again. This time, she added the date, the initials beside the transfer, and the notation that the beneficiary line extended to lawful daughters if the original widow died before full payment. A committee gentleman leaned forward, colour rising over his collar. Signora Belandi pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Lady Eulalie stood near the pianoforte, with her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened beneath her gloves. Mrs. Marcella Vane sat frozen, her fallen fan still unopened in her lap. Lord Tarquin gave a sad, indulgent sigh. An old page, improperly handled and without context. "I grieve for Miss Lyle's disappointment. But grief has led many young women to read promise where only administrative courtesy was intended." Sophronia turned to Mr. Vale. "The counterfoil, if you please." Mr. Vale lifted it by the edges. This counterfoil was removed from Miss Lyle's program case in my presence and examined. It reads, Lyle, Swan Box, paid in perpetuity. The paper age, ink, and wording correspond with committee instruments of the relevant period. Correspond, Tarquin said, not prove. Then the ledger, Sophronia said. Mr. Vale placed the copied opera ledger page beside the counterfoil. This is the page displayed by Lord Petherton at the prior review. Here, beneath later scratching, washing, and overwritten ruling, a removed entry appears in the position where the Lyle name would fall alphabetically. The erasure is visible to those instructed to see it, Tarquin replied. Gareth moved no closer. His jaw tightened, but he kept silent. Sophronia felt the gift of that silence. It let her own voice stand. Then his Grace's index, she said. Gareth set the burned edge page on the table, then withdrew his hand. Sophronia lifted it for the room. From the Keldrake archive, burned at the edge, but not destroyed. Clara Lyle appears here under Swan Box annuity. Beside her name are the initials TF. A sharper murmur moved through the witnesses. Tarquin laughed quietly. Those initials could belong to any clerk. Were you a clerk, Lord Petherton? Sophronia asked. The room stilled. His smile thinned. Do not become impertinent. I am trying very hard to remain precise. Mrs. Anning made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Sophronia continued before anyone could rescue or interrupt her. The locked folio was borrowed from Keldrake House 10 years ago by Lord Petherton and never returned. The Keldrake steward remembers the borrowing. The folio appeared tonight in Lord Petherton's possession. Its page was cut out and reinserted backward. On the hidden side is my mother's name. Tarquin's hand struck the back of a chair, not violently enough to be called violence, hard enough to make 3 ladies start. Enough. Are we to let a dependent woman's theatrical reading outweigh an earl's record? Gareth's eyes darkened, but Sophronia raised one hand, barely, and he remained still. She looked at Tarquin. If I invented the right, why did your hand remove my mother's name before I was old enough to read it? The question entered the saloon and changed it. It gave every elegant witness a shape for what they had been avoiding. Not confusion, removal, not sentiment, theft. One of the committee gentlemen turned toward Tarquin. My lord, the folio was in your custody, temporarily, for 10 years, mislaid among committee papers. Signora Bellandi rose with effort. No, not mislaid. Clara told me she had been advised not to ask again after her husband's difficulties. She said a gentleman had made kindness sound like a favor she had already used too much of. Tarquin's face hardened. An aging singer's recollection is not evidence. Then take mine. The small voice came from near the side door. The frightened maid from the music room stood there, pale as candle wax, with Mrs. Harcourt's firm hand at her elbow. I moved the folio last week, my lord. You said, Miss Lyle mustn't see the Swan page. You said, if Lady Eulalie could make her read the wrong side, everyone would laugh, and the matter would end. Lady Eulalie made a strangled sound. Mary, don't. The maid looked at her mistress with wet eyes. I'm sorry, my lady, but I won't be damned for a page. Tarquin turned on Mrs. Vane. You have a statement. Marcella rose too quickly, clutching the signed paper as if it were armor. Miss Lyle invented the connection after attracting his Grace's attention. She had no knowledge of any Swan Box while in my house. She was excitable, romantic, given to imagining herself overlooked. Sophronia faced her. On what date did I first speak of the counterfoil? Marcella blinked. After the opera. And on what date did you command me to sign a letter denying any charitable connection, box entitlement, or right associated with the swan clasp? Marcella's mouth opened, then closed. Mr. Vale unfolded the apology draft Sophronia had marked through. The draft is dated the morning after the opera. It uses the phrases charitable connection and box entitlement before Miss Lyle had publicly claimed either. Mrs. Vane, who supplied you those words? Marcella looked toward Tarquin. That was answer enough. The room turned. Not all at once. Society rarely repented with speed. But one face after another altered from suspicion to calculation, from calculation to distance. Tarquin had become dangerous to know. Lady Eulalie stepped forward, her beauty strained thin. "I knew the clasp mattered," she whispered. "I knew Father wanted the case dismissed. I didn't know about the annuity. I didn't know money had been taken." Sophronia looked at her and felt no triumph, only the exhaustion of seeing how many people could assist a wrong by choosing not to know its full shape. "You knew enough to make me ashamed of sitting down," she said. Eulalie lowered her eyes. Lord Tarquin drew himself upright. "This is an outrage. I will not be judged in my own house by sentimental women, servants, and a duke who has forgotten prudence for infatuation." At last, Gareth stepped forward, but he did not touch the papers. He did not take Sophronia's place. "Rank does not sanctify fraud," he said, "nor does my regard for Miss Lyle create the evidence against you. You created that yourself when you cut a woman's name from a record and trusted society to despise her daughter too quickly to read the page." The words landed with quiet force. A committee gentleman removed his name from the evening's attendance sheet and asked Mr. Vale where a formal account might be reviewed. Another patron declared that no further funds would be entrusted to Lord Petherton's committee until the annuity books were examined. "Mrs." Harcourt said, clearly enough for every woman present to hear, that Mrs. Vane's drawing room would not be one she visited again. Marcella sat down as if her bones had given way. Tarquin's future did not collapse in a dramatic shout. It narrowed in silence. Invitations withdrew before they were spoken. Hands did not extend. Eyes moved away from him as if disgrace were catching Mr. Vale gathered the folio, the counterfoil copy, the scratched ledger copy, the burned edge index, and Marcella's statement into his case under the eyes of two witnesses. "The matter of recovery will proceed," he said, "and the charitable accounts will be examined." Sophronia placed her palm over the program case. Her mother's name had been read. Her father's ruin, used as a threat, no longer stood alone. The shame had acquired another owner. Gareth turned to the room, then to her, and she knew before he spoke that he would not hide behind the justice of this hour. "Miss Lyle," he said publicly, "before all here, I owe you correction as well as apology. At the opera, I asked you to withdraw before I understood who was being sacrificed for peace. At the first review, I announced my courtship before asking whether my protection served your truth or silenced it. I was wrong in both. Your courage required witness, not management." Sophronia felt every gaze return to her, but this time the looking did not erase. It recognized. Gareth offered his hand, palm open. Not command, not claim. Choice. She placed her gloved fingers in his for one brief moment, accepting the apology before the witnesses who had seen the harm. Then she released him and stood alone. That mattered too. "My mother's name," she said to the room, "is Clara Lyle. Mine is Sophronia Lyle. Neither is a favor granted by any committee." Mrs. Anning wept openly then, without apology. Signora Belandi bowed her head. Lady Eulalie turned away, pale and diminished. Lord Tarquin stood amid candles that had been lit for Sophronia's humiliation, and now showed every line of his defeat. When she left Petherton House later, with Mrs. Anning on one side, and Gareth walking at a respectful distance on the other. No footman looked past her in search of someone more important. In the hall mirror, she saw herself clearly. Not the Duke's protected dependent, not Mrs. Vane's ungrateful companion, not Lord Petherton's troublesome claimant. Miss Lyle, whose name society would now have to speak correctly. 1 week later, Her Majesty's Theatre received Miss Sophronia Lyle as if London had never doubted her right to enter, which was how Sophronia knew London had remembered perfectly. The same lamps burned along the entrance. The same horses stamped in the damp May evening. The same silk shoulders, jeweled throats, and feathered heads turned at the sound of carriage doors. Yet tonight, the turning did not cut in quite the same way. Some faces looked away quickly, ashamed of being caught in their own memory. Some smiled too brightly, eager to have always been kind. A few offered bows that arrived late enough to reveal the labor behind them. Sophronia accepted none of it as victory and all of it as evidence. She descended from Mrs. Anning's hired carriage with the older woman's hand on her arm and the restored program case in her own gloved hand. The tortoise shell had been cleaned until its brown depths glowed softly beneath the theatre lamps. The silver swan clasp had been mended by a careful craftsman, not made new. Its cracked wing remained visible, a fine, bright line across the metal, but it closed securely now. Sophronia had insisted upon that. Some breaks were not shameful, they were records. At the door, a footman bowed and said, "Miss Lyle," with the careful correctness of a man who had been instructed by several anxious superiors. Mrs. Anning sniffed. "Better." Sophronia felt a smile touch her mouth. "Do not praise him too much. He may become vain. I don't praise footmen. I acknowledge improvement in civilization." Inside, the theatre shimmered with the old dangerous beauty. The staircase rose beneath candlelight. Perfume drifted above warmed velvet. Voices hushed and rose again, carrying the names that mattered this week. Lord Petherton's did not travel well now. His committee accounts had gone under Mr. Vale's examination, and the first withdrawals of patronage had begun before the ink dried. Mrs. Marcella Vane's receiving room had grown quiet with the speed of social weather. Lady Eulalie Fane had left town to visit an aunt who had not invited guests for 14 years. None of that restored Clara Lyle's lost years. None of it paid every annuity owed, but the direction of justice had altered. Tonight, in Sophronia's hand, was the first printed proof. She opened the new program and read the line again, though she had read it 20 times before leaving Bloomsbury. Restored Swan Box Patronus, Miss Sophronia Lyle, in memory of Mrs. Clara Lyle. The words did not tremble. She did. Not visibly, she hoped. Mrs. Anning saw anyway and patted her arm with unceremonious affection. "Your mother would have complained about the typeface." "Yes," Sophronia whispered. "Then she would have kept it. Their box was not Mrs. Vane's old one. That mattered too. The restored Swan Box sat modestly placed. Not the grandest view, but a rightful one, newly assigned for the charitable purpose its endowment had intended. Tonight, 2 widowed music teachers occupied the front seats at Sophronia's invitation. Signora Belandi sat near the rail, proud as a queen in plain black silk. Sophronia took the chair behind them, at first from habit, then stopped. Mrs. Anning gave her a look. Sophronia breathed once and moved to the side seat where her name had been placed. Not the back, not the edge, her place. The old discomfort rose, whispering that space must be earned again every moment. She set the restored program case on her lap and let her hand rest lightly over it. Across the theatre, the Keldrake box remained empty. Sophronia told herself not to look for him. She failed. The curtain had not yet risen when Gareth St. Ormond entered. Conversation changed, just as it had that first night. But Sophronia no longer felt herself vanish beneath the shift. He stood for a moment in the crimson-draped box opposite hers, severe in evening black, his face composed, his attention searching only one place. When his gaze found her, the distance between them filled with memory. The note that had ordered her to vanish, the bow that had undone it, the carriage hand steadying hers, the archive embrace, the corridor kiss before battle, his public apology. Her hand released so she could stand alone. Tonight, he did not bow across the theatre. Instead, after a brief exchange with his attendant, he left his box. Sophronia's heart changed its rhythm. Mrs. Anning noticed and pretended not to with heroic transparency. Minutes later, the door to the Swan Box opened and the footman announced, "His Grace the Duke of Keldrake." The widowed teachers rose in alarm. Gareth bowed them back into comfort, with a courtesy so exact it eased rather than dazzled. Then he turned to Sophronia. "Miss Lyle, may I sit beside you tonight rather than across from you?" The question moved through her more deeply than any declaration could have done before its time. He had not assumed the chair. He had not used his rank to make the room rearrange around his wish, he asked. Sophronia glanced at Mrs. Anning, who raised her brows, as if to say that a woman who had defeated an earl might surely manage one careful duke. "Yes, Your Grace," Sophronia said. "You may." He sat beside her with enough distance for propriety and enough nearness for truth. The opera began, but Sophronia heard only parts of the first act. She was too aware of quiet things, the fold of his glove against his knee, the way he did not look at her constantly, as if guarding her from becoming spectacle, the way he listened when Signora Belandi whispered a comment about the soprano's phrasing. During the interval, Gareth rose. "Mrs. Anning, might I ask Miss Lyle for a few minutes on the terrace, where you can see us clearly and disapprove if required?" "I can disapprove from any distance, Your Grace. A useful talent. A cultivated one." Sophronia laughed softly, and the sound felt new, because it contained no apology. On the terrace, the evening air carried the scent of damp stone and carriage lamps. Mrs. Anning remained visible through the open doors, seated with heroic vigilance beside Signora Belandi. Gareth stood beside Sophronia, not touching her, both of them looking first over the street rather than at each other. "The first recovered payment will be made next week," he said. "Mr. Vale believes more will follow once the full accounts are opened. The widows should receive it before any public notice is printed." "I agree." "And my mother's name?" "Entered in the corrected book, in ink that will not politely fade." Sophronia looked down at the program case. "I thought seeing my name printed would feel like winning." "Does it not? It feels like being given back something I should never have had to prove was mine. That may be truer than winning." Silence settled, gentle this time. Then Gareth turned toward her, and the restraint in his face changed into something braver than control. "I said I had something plain to say after truth was finished." Sophronia's hand tightened over the restored clasp. "Yes, I love you, Sophronia, not because I defended you, and not because London was wrong, but because you taught me that truth is not something to manage from a distance. I love your courage when it is tired. I love your precision when others demand sentiment. I love that you would rather stand in a difficult place, honestly, than sit in comfort by permission." Her eyes stung, but she smiled because tears were not the only language of being moved. That is very plain for a duke. "I can attempt worse poetry if plainness disappoints you." "Don't." The word came out warm, human, His answering smile was small and unguarded, and it nearly stole her breath. Sophronia turned fully toward him. I love you, Gareth, and I choose you because you learned to stand beside me, not over me. I choose you because you asked when command would have been easier. I choose you because when I restand your hand, you let me stand alone and did not punish me for needing to. His composure broke quietly, not into display, but into wonder. Sophronia reached for his hand first. His fingers opened beneath hers, waiting even then, and she placed her hand in his. The contact was warm through their gloves, familiar now and still astonishing. May I kiss you? He asked. Mrs. Anning was visible through the glass, pointedly examining the chandelier while seeing everything. Sophronia stepped closer by her own choice. Yes. The kiss was gentle and restrained, no more than the meeting of truth and tenderness beneath London's damp evening air. Yet it held every room they had survived. When it ended, Gareth did not keep her there. He let her draw back, though his hand remained in hers because she did not release it. Proper courtship, she said softly, with witnesses, patience, and no rescue disguised as destiny. Yes, and if I refuse any part of your plan, then I shall have the privilege of learning a better one. She laughed again, and this time he did too. They returned to the Swan Box together. No one announced it, no one needed to. Sophronia took her rightful seat with Gareth beside her, Mrs. Anning behind her, and Clara Lyle's name printed in the program resting open upon her lap. As the music rose, Sophronia opened the restored tortoiseshell case and slid the program inside. The silver swan clasp closed around the printed page bearing her own name, its old crack catching the candlelight like a scar that had learned to shine without disappearing. Across the opera house, the crimson box, where the Duke had once watched from afar, stood empty. Sophronia looked toward it, then back to the man beside her. This time she returned the gaze first.